Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Evan Grady. I was 31 years old when this happened, back in June 2024. Even now, I'm not entirely certain how much of it was real and how much was some kind of delusion or fever dream. What I can say is that I lived it, felt it in every trembling nerve and every frantic heartbeat. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up gasping for air, convinced I hear voices that don't belong in this world. I'm an audio engineer by trade, freelance mostly. I've always had a knack for capturing soundscapes in places untouched by city noise, forests, desert canyons, remote coastal dunes. My job is half technical skill, half love for the wild. That's what drew me to Sumter National Forest in South Carolina in early June. A client hired me to record unsettling, ominous ambience for a horror podcast. I figured the thick pine stands and lonely trails of Sumter would be perfect. I drove from Asheville in my old Subaru, accompanied by my 5-year-old German Shepherd, Boone. Boone was my faithful shadow, always curious, always wagging his tail at strangers. Back then, I thought I'd never see him cower. That changed. At the heart of Sumter, there's a network of seldom-used trails accessible by dirt roads that can get pretty sketchy after a rain. I parked by a dead-end sign where the gravel faded into patchy mud, then loaded my backpack, a tent, and my audio gear. I was determined to stay out there for 4 days. My plan was simple: roam the forest, record dawn and dusk, maybe capture the nighttime insects and rustling canopy, then head home with hours of material. Nothing more complicated than that. But I'd come to realize that nature has a way of punishing arrogance. The first day was uneventful enough. I found a decent clearing near a creek to pitch my tent. Boone ran through the tall grass, chasing imaginary critters, as I got a campfire going before sunset. We had no cell signal, but I expected that. My phone was fully charged, and the camera battery was fresh, so I wasn't worried. The real problem, it turned out, wasn't battery power, it was time itself. When darkness fell, I switched on my recorder and listened for the usual forest nightlife. It sounded off. The chirps and squeaks were there, but it was as if they were layered behind a distant humming that came and went like a pulse. I couldn't pinpoint a source. Then the hush fell. A complete and utter silence that yawned across the woods like a giant mouth swallowing all sound. Even the wind died. I stood there holding my recorder, sweat starting to bead on my forehead because I couldn't recall ever experiencing so total a hush in the outdoors. Boone whimpered at my feet. I gave him a quick scratch behind the ears, trying to settle him. When I looked around, I realized I couldn't see the stars overhead, nor the moon. A layer of thick clouds must have rolled in, but I hadn't noticed them before. Then, out of nowhere, the quiet snapped like a broken string, and the usual forest noise returned in a roar: crickets, frogs, the distant hoot of an owl. It seemed normal again, except for the hairs on my arms standing upright. Eventually, I coaxed Boone into the tent. The plan was an early morning hike deeper into the forest. That was the last moment I felt anything close to safety. I woke up at what I believed must have been dawn because my watch read 6:12 a.m., but outside the tent it was still near dark. Something like pre-dawn gloom, the way the horizon sometimes brightens just enough to form shapes. Yet it never turned to actual morning sunlight. I double-checked my watch, 6:16 a.m., then 6:17 a.m. Time was moving, but the daylight wasn't coming. I tried to brush it off as an overcast morning, but my gut already knew that wasn't right. While I wrestled with the tent zipper, Boone barked frantically. It took me a second to register what he was barking at. There was a shape in the woods, about 20 yards away, moving among the trees. For a split second, I saw the outline of a person. Then Boone lunged, barking to chase them off. I managed to hold him back by his collar. I called out, "Hello?" but got no answer. The shape slipped into the shadows, silent as the wind. A stray hiker maybe, or a game warden checking on me. But something didn't feel right. My heart hammered in my chest. I decided to break camp sooner rather than later. If I was trespassing on private property, or if this area was restricted, I wanted to be on my way quickly. While I packed, I realized how disorganized my stuff had become overnight. My sleeping bag was unzipped from inside, even though I distinctly remembered waking up zipped snugly. My phone battery, which had been near 80% the night before, was dead, completely drained, and my camera battery also showed no life. The map I had printed out showed trails, but the terrain around me was different. The creek I'd camped beside was no longer a neat line the way it was drawn on paper. It branched and snaked off in all directions. Places that should have been marked with footpaths were overgrown with thorn bushes. I shrugged it off, but the anxiety started to pile up. Still, I slung my backpack on and set off with Boone down a new path. My plan: get a bit deeper, find a good place to record, and if the strangeness persisted, head back to the car. Easy. Except it wasn't. About an hour into walking, we circled back to the same clearing where we'd camped, even though I'd taken careful compass readings. The fire pit, the flattened grass from my tent, it was all right there in front of me. I couldn't figure out how I'd looped around in under an hour. I decided to push further north instead, forcing my way through thicker underbrush. About an hour later, I found myself in the same clearing again. Boone paced around, panting heavily, more anxious than I'd ever seen him. That's when I heard a shout. "Evan, are you out here?" At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Then I recognized the voice. Jason Lint. I nearly collapsed from relief. Jason was a college friend I'd texted about this trip a couple of days before leaving. He said he might swing by, but I never expected him to track me down in the forest. Sure enough, Jason emerged from the tree line alongside Kayla Monroe, his new girlfriend. The strangest part was that they each lugged backpacks like they'd been hiking for days. Kayla's hair was matted with sweat, her cheeks flushed. "What are you doing here?" I asked, half laughing, half terrified. Jason shrugged. "You texted me the GPS coordinates on Monday night, said we should tag along if we wanted an adventure, so we drove up, followed the pinned route, but then the roads got weird and we ended up parking near some old logging track. We've been hiking to find you for about 6 hours." He shot me a puzzled look. "Man, we tried calling you, but your phone was off." I stared at him. I never sent a single text with coordinates. I told them generally I'd be in Sumter National Forest, but not exactly where. I put that aside for a moment, too shaken by the relief of not being alone. At least I had 2 extra sets of eyes now. Kayla was panting. There was no signal out here, and for some reason, my phone also died on the way, she said, pushing strands of hair from her face. We decided to keep going, but it's like the forest keeps looping us back. Half the trails lead nowhere. Jason cracked an uneasy grin. "We're probably overthinking it. Let's just find a better campsite together, get a fire going, share what we've got, and we can all leave first thing in the morning." I didn't like the idea of staying another night, but the sky still hadn't brightened. Even though my watch read nearly 10 a.m., it looked like eternal twilight. Kayla checked her watch. It said 9:58 a.m. that matched. Time was moving normally, just without the sun. Despite the logical part of me screaming that I should head straight for the car, I got swept up in the moment. Having Jason and Kayla there made me feel safer. I reasoned we'd reorient ourselves better in daylight, if it ever came, and maybe we'd find our vehicles faster in the morning. We gathered our tents in the clearing, deciding to stay put since it was at least open land. Jason found some sizable fallen branches for the fire. Kayla helped me build a stone ring. Boone sat close to me, giving Jason an occasional low growl. I assumed Boone was just unsettled by all the weirdness, but the tension in the dog's posture told me he sensed something beyond typical caution. That evening, everything grew stranger. The fire flared bright orange at first, then sputtered and shifted to a bizarre greenish hue. The wood was definitely dry. I'd never seen a normal campfire glow that color. Kayla joked that it was some kind of chemical in the logs. Jason tried to laugh it off, too. We all forced chuckles, but no one truly believed it was harmless. We attempted to get some rest. I crawled into my tent around 8 p.m. according to my watch, convinced it couldn't possibly get any darker than it already was. Boone curled up at my feet. My last conscious thought was a fleeting pang of worry that the morning might not come again. I jolted awake to the sound of Boone barking. The tent was pitch black. My watch read 2:15 A. I felt the ground for my flashlight. Once I turned it on, I realized Boone was gone. The flap of my tent was unzipped, wide open. I scrabbled into my boots, scrambled outside, and nearly blinded myself shining the flashlight around. Jason's tent was empty too. Kayla's was half open, no sign of her. Fear hit my chest like a sledgehammer. All of them had disappeared in the middle of the night. "Boone," I shouted. "Jason, Kayla." No response. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, not even the hum of distant frogs. Then a bark cut the silence far off to my left. I barreled through the underbrush, thorns snagging at my pants. I followed the bark to a shallow ravine where a crooked oak stood, twisted and black as if it had been burned. Boone stood beneath it, hackles raised, teeth bared, barking furiously at something I couldn't see. I hurried to him, shining my flashlight around. For half a second, I thought I saw a woman, hunched and pale, her arms unnaturally long, nails as pointed as claws, crouched behind the trunk of the tree. She turned her face towards me, huge, black, eyes dripping with something. Then she vanished behind the oak. It happened so fast, I questioned my own eyes. Boone stopped barking, but remained rigid as a statue. I forced myself to look for footprints or any sign of Jason or Kayla, but the ground was all roots and pine needles, no clues. "Where are they, boy?" I whispered to Boone. He whimpered as if answering me. I was about to head back when I heard footsteps. Soft, measured. Out of the darkness came Jason, carrying firewood in both arms. He looked normal enough at first glance, but something in his expression set off alarms in my brain. The corners of his mouth were turned up, far up, in a grin that didn't match his eyes. He stared at me for a good 5 seconds before speaking. "Hey, man," he said, "you okay?" "Where were you?" I demanded, shining the light in his face. "And where's Kayla?" He shrugged, still smiling too big. "Went to gather wood. She's around." That was all he said. Then he stepped past me, walking back toward camp. I followed, trying to get him to say more, but he wouldn't answer any direct questions. He just looked at me oddly, blinking far too little. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. When we got back to the clearing, Kayla was there near the fire ring, except the fire was out. She stood completely still, her back to us. She didn't turn around when I shone the flashlight over her shoulder. "Kayla?" I whispered. She said nothing. I touched her shoulder and she flinched as if I'd burned her. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes were ringed with red. tears or maybe broken capillaries. She tried to speak but only managed a ragged breath. I realized she was trembling violently. Behind me, Jason chuckled under his breath. I turned to him, uncertain if I'd misheard. "Dude, did you see anything weird out there?" Jason's face was solemn again. "I saw a woman wandering," he said. "She told me she'd been dead a long time, but it was so lonely, you know? Thought I'd keep her company." I stared at him, not sure if he was joking or in shock. His words felt drenched in mania, like the punchline to a horrible joke I couldn't decipher. Kayla coughed, and a thin line of spit drooled from the corner of her mouth. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "We should leave. We need to leave right now." "Let's go," I said, ignoring the fact that it was the middle of the night and we had no reliable sense of direction. Anything felt safer than staying in that clearing. But as we tried to gather our gear, we discovered that everything was in disarray. Our backpacks had been opened and rummaged through. Half of our food was slimy and rancid, as though it had been left to rot for days. My compass? Gone. My spare phone battery also gone. Kayla cursed under her breath, rummaging for a map that had become soaked to the point of tearing. Even the matches were damp. Jason just stood there, occasionally tilting his head like he was listening for something. I weighed my options. If we had no map, no phone, and no compass, we'd have to rely on my memory of the route back to the car. That meant heading northwest until we found the dirt logging road. "Pack what you can carry," I said, forcing composure into my voice. Jason didn't move, his arms hung limp. "Evan," he finally said, "do you hear her voice?" A look of puzzlement crossed his face, as though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. Kayla grabbed his arm, but he pulled away with surprising force. Something was deeply wrong with him. He had always been an overconfident, charming guy, but what I saw in his eyes was vacant, not like shock or fear, more like vacancy lit by a dangerous curiosity. We started marching west, or what I believed to be west, guided by a faint slope in the terrain. We must have hiked for hours, but dawn never came. Occasionally, a breeze rustled the treetops, but beyond that, no animal calls, no insects, no sense of a living forest. It was as though everything had died or fled, leaving just the trees, the darkness, and us. Then Kayla stumbled onto something. I heard her yelp, and when I ran up, I saw she had nearly stepped into a shallow pit filled with bones. Some were definitely animal, raccoon or deer maybe, but others looked disturbingly human. A skull grinned from the dirt, half buried. Kayla retched onto the moss. Jason just stared. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, shining the flashlight around. The beam fell on a shape beyond the pit, something made of wood, propped up like a cross or a makeshift marker. At its center hung a scrap of fabric. It looked like a piece of a shirt. I recognized the color, pale blue, just like the t-shirt I wore my first night. But that was impossible. I was wearing my shirt right then. I checked, my stomach turning inside out. Sure enough, my shirt was intact. So, how was a matching scrap nailed to that cross? As if in answer, a moan drifted through the trees. A plaintive, drawn-out wail that made the hair on my arms stand up. I turned to see if Jason or Kayla had made the sound, but Kayla looked as startled as me, and Jason was once again wearing that eerie grin. Boone whimpered, then barked. He darted off into the trees, ignoring my command to stay. "Boone, come back, boy," I shouted, chasing after him before I lost him completely in the gloom. I distantly heard Kayla calling me to wait, but I couldn't afford to let Boone vanish. He had saved my life before. Once, on a steep cliff trail in North Carolina, he'd pulled me back from the edge. I wasn't about to abandon him. My flashlight swung wildly in front of me, illuminating branches that seemed to grab at me like bony fingers. Finally, I caught up to Boone in a small clearing overshadowed by a massive oak tree. The trunk was charred black in patches, as if lightning had struck it multiple times. Boone had his teeth bared at a figure kneeling at the base of the trunk. The figure had long, dirty hair and wore a tattered dress. My brain scrambled. Was this the same woman I glimpsed earlier? The one with unnaturally long arms. She was hunched over something, her shoulders jerking as if she was sobbing or laughing. Slowly, she lifted her head and turned to look at me. Her face was half rotted, skin hanging off in places like wet tissue paper. Empty eye sockets stared back at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Boone barked hysterically, but even the dog seemed rooted in place, uncertain whether to attack or run. That's when Jason stepped out from the trees behind the woman, like he'd been there all along. He wore the same grin, only now it seemed too wide for his face, like his jaw had unhinged slightly. A trick of the light, maybe, but it was enough to send my sanity careening. "She says she's been waiting," Jason said softly, as though speaking in reverence. "Evan, come here. You need to see this." The woman rose in a jerky, unnatural movement, her limbs cracking. She reached out a bony hand, nails black and curling. Her mouth hung open, revealing a swirl of black rot. And then she spoke, or rather, something rasped out of that mouth. A voice like the crunch of dead leaves saying my name, "Evan." I let out a strangled cry. Boone lunged, teeth snapping. Before I even realized what I was doing, I whipped out the hunting knife I carried for safety, brandishing it. Jason turned his gaze to me, his eyes distant. "She's lonely," he repeated. "She wants us to stay." Kayla burst into the clearing then, panting. She took one look at the woman and screamed. That awful wail came from the woman again, high-pitched and bone-chilling. Birds erupted from the nearby trees, scattering. My ears rang with the sound. Kayla grabbed my arm, pulling me away. Boone barked and barked, but then the woman screeched and swiped at him with nails so long they looked like talons, slicing his shoulder. Boone yelped. Jason laughed, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. We ran. There was nothing else we could do. Kayla half-dragged me, and Boone kept pace with a limp, blood matting his fur. I glanced back to see Jason standing there with that putrid entity. He waved goodbye at us, still grinning, eyes glassy as marbles. We sprinted deeper into the pines, no clear sense of direction. The physical exertion made my lungs burn, but adrenaline pushed me onward. Eventually, we collapsed near a rocky outcrop, panting and coughing. Boone lay down, licking his wounded shoulder. Kayla sobbed quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. I was too numb to comfort her. My mind kept replaying the image of that woman's rotted face and Jason's empty stare. Hours might have passed while we cowered there. The darkness never lifted, and no sense of morning came. We had no tent, no food, just a single water bottle Kayla had managed to hang onto half full. When she'd finally collected herself, her voice trembled but was steady enough to form words. "We can't let him stay out there with that thing. We have to go back, right?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to tell her we had to rescue him, but my every instinct shrieked that going back was suicidal. The forest felt drenched in some vile presence that could twist time and drain our hope. I forced out a whisper. "We'll try, but we can't do it blind. Let's circle around, look for a path leading to the road." Kayla just nodded, tears streaming silently. We gathered ourselves and started walking again, forcing our stiff legs to move. The rustle of leaves overhead sounded like whispers, or maybe there were whispers, drifting on the wind. More than once I caught Boone staring into the trees as if expecting something to appear. We found an animal trail that wound between thick clusters of pines. At least it was a path of sorts. So we followed it. An eternity later, we stopped. The trail opened to a small clearing, and there, in the center, was Jason, or at least something that wore his face. He stood with his back to us, singing softly. I recognized the tune as a lullaby from our college days, something he'd hum when bored. Now it was disturbingly slow, each note drawn out like a moan. Kayla gasped. Boone growled low. Cautiously, I moved closer. "Jason, are you okay?" I realized how stupid the question sounded the moment it left my mouth. He spun around, a wild gleam in his eyes. His lips had dried blood on them, and his clothes were stained with something blackish-brown. "She's here," he whispered. "She's in me. It's beautiful. It's like floating, Evan. You don't have to be afraid." I stepped back. "Jason, come with us. We'll find help." My voice cracked. "Help?" He tilted his head, lips twitching as if he were tasting the word. "I don't need help. She needs us. All of us." Behind me, Kayla let out a strangled cry. I heard the crackle of underbrush, and before I could turn, that woman loomed at the edge of my vision. She seemed to slither behind a thick trunk, then reappear on the other side, almost flickering, as though she was stepping between shadows. I gripped my hunting knife again, resolved not to back down. "Kayla," I whispered, "take Boone and get out of here." Jason's face twisted in sudden fury. "She wants Kayla," he hissed. "She's tasted her fear. She wants more." Kayla let out a sob. She turned to run, but Jason lunged. Faster than I thought possible, he tackled her to the ground. Boone barked hysterically, biting at Jason's arm. Jason winced but kept his grip, pinning Kayla. She screamed, thrashing beneath him. I rushed forward and grabbed Jason by the shoulders, trying to pull him off. He was unnaturally strong, or perhaps I was just exhausted and terrified. He shoved me so hard I stumbled back, smacking against a tree trunk, white spots dancing in my vision. Then, as if in a fever dream, I saw him raise a sharpened stick, maybe a broken branch. He held it above Kayla's chest. "No!" I roared, launching myself at him again. This time, I jammed my knife into his side up to the hilt. Jason gurgled, eyes going wide. The stick fell from his hand. Blood ran over my fingers as I pulled away, horrified by what I'd done. Jason collapsed off of Kayla, rolling onto his back. She scrambled away, wide-eyed, sobbing. I expected him to scream or pass out, but Jason kept breathing, making wet, rattling sounds. He fixed his gaze on me, his smile returning, pale lips cracking. "She forgives you, Evan," he managed through a bubble of crimson. "She says you'll join me soon." And then he convulsed, going rigid, and a final breath rattled out. His eyes, still open, took on that glassy stare. A cold shockwave traveled through me. I'd killed him. God help me, I'd killed Jason. Kayla's sobbing turned guttural, while Boone whimpered, nudging Jason's still hand. Only it wasn't entirely still. His fingers twitched once, twice, as though something inside him was trying to keep moving. Then they went limp, but there was no time to grieve or process. From behind the trees, that woman's voice rose again in a wail of unearthly fury. The sound shattered the quiet. Kayla and I covered our ears, tears streaming. My eardrums felt like they might burst. The woman lurched into the clearing, close enough for me to see her face in detail. The drooping, half-rotted flesh, the vacant eye sockets that occasionally shimmered with a black, oily substance. Her jaw hung slack, revealing blackened teeth. She stared at Jason's corpse, then at us, as though deciding what to do next. I could hardly think through the pain in my ears and the pounding of my own heart. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, dragging Jason's body to the side so Kayla could escape around the woman. The woman advanced, her arms outstretched, nails scraping against the ground. Boone barked and snapped at her ankles, but she barely seemed to register him. Kayla scrambled to her feet, her face streaked with dirt and tears. I grabbed her arm. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted out of the clearing, leaving Jason's lifeless body behind. The part that killed me was the thought that maybe he wasn't truly dead. Maybe that thing would pull him back up to stand and grin, as she had done to something else. But I couldn't look back. We sprinted until our lungs burned, weaving between massive pines and a maddening half-light that refused to change. At some point, I realized Kayla was limping, and I remembered how Jason had pinned her. I tried to help her along, but we were both running on fumes. Boone limped as well from his earlier wound. We had maybe half a bottle of water left. Everything else? Lost or ruined. I don't know how many hours passed as we wandered, terrified of every noise, every shifting shadow. Once or twice we thought we heard twigs snapping behind us, but we never saw anything. My watch read 4 a.m. at some point, but it might as well have been an eternity of night. Finally, we stumbled across a small ravine with a trickle of water at the bottom. Fresh water. I knelt to fill our bottle. Kayla drank greedily, then puked it all up, either from stress or something else. Boone lapped from the stream, whining softly. We had to rest, at least for a moment. So we huddled against a mossy boulder, my knife clutched in one hand, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. That's when Kayla broke the silence with a small, shaking voice. What? What was she? Did Jason say something about being lonely? I closed my eyes, thinking of that ghost-like figure. The rotted flesh, the screech, the impossible manipulations of time and space. I don't know, I murmured. Some kind of spirit? Witch? Banshee? I can't explain it. Do you think we can kill it? Kayla asked, a desperation creeping into her voice. You killed Jason. My stomach twisted in guilt at the mention. I don't know if she can die like a normal person. We lapsed into silence. I tried to gather my thoughts, but all I could think was that we needed to keep moving until we found the car. Nothing else mattered. If we stayed, we were doomed, either possessed, killed, or worse. But I had no idea which direction to go, and it felt like we'd been wandering in circles for days. We found a faint logging path near the top of the ravine, so we followed it, hoping it would lead to a real road. The forest around us had changed subtly, the trees spaced oddly, their trunks bearing strange symbols I couldn't decipher. The path itself was overgrown with brambles that snagged our clothes. Boone led the way, sniffing hesitantly. Then I spotted a figure ahead of us. Immediately my heart jumped into my throat. Kayla grabbed my arm, eyes wide. We both froze, but the figure didn't move. I squinted, inching closer. It was an old, battered sign. Logging access, no trespassing. I'd never been so happy to see an ominous warning in my life. If we were at a logging access, then maybe we were close to an actual road. The sign had bullet holes and graffiti, but it was definitely real, standing on a rough track of gravel. We followed that gravel track, hearts hammering. Every 100 yards or so, we heard faint moans or saw fleeting shapes in the corner of our vision, but nothing attacked us directly. It was as if the forest wanted to remind us it was still there, still hungry. The tension built until I could hardly breathe. At last, the track widened and dipped into a clearing. My eyes adjusted to see a small building, maybe an old ranger cabin or a work shed. It was boarded up, with a heavy chain and padlock on the door. Kayla rushed up, rattling the chain. No luck. We circled around the back and found a small side window half broken. I used a rock to clear the remaining glass, then hoisted Kayla inside. Boone hopped in after her, and then I followed, taking care not to slice myself on the jagged edges. Inside, the cabin smelled of must and old oil, but at least it was covered. A battered metal desk stood in one corner, a couple of rusted chairs in another. No electricity, obviously. Still, it felt safer than the open woods. Kayla collapsed onto the floor, hugging Boone. I set about barricading the window with a loose plank I found, then rummaged around for anything useful. I discovered an ancient first aid kit in a drawer, though most items were expired. Still, there was some gauze. I used it to dress Boone's shoulder, which had coagulated but looked nasty. Kayla's ankle was bruised, not broken. My own arms were covered in cuts from thorn bushes. As we tried to catch our breath, a faint scraping sound echoed from outside. I froze, glancing at Kayla. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. We heard the noise again, scrape, scrape, like something dragging across the gravel. Then the whispery voice of a woman. "Evan." Kayla shuddered so violently that she knocked over a rusted tin cup. The sound clanged in the silence. I grabbed my knife again, heart pounding. We waited in agonizing stillness, braced for the boards over the window to be ripped away. But minutes passed, and nothing happened. The scraping moved around the front of the cabin, then faded. A wave of relief swept over me, though it was tempered by dread. The creature was there, prowling, waiting. I prayed it couldn't find a way in. We were pinned down like mice. Tiredness hit me like a truck. My body was screaming for rest, my mind battered by the endless nightmare of darkness and chase. Kayla was running on fumes, her eyes bloodshot. Boone curled against my leg, still tense. I wasn't sure if I could risk sleeping, but at some point, my eyelids closed on their own accord. I must have dozed off for a bit. I woke to Kayla shrieking. Boone was barking frantically. My eyes snapped open to see Jason, or a twisted version of him, clawing through the window boards. His face was ashen, with the wound in his side still oozing black fluid. His eyes were sunken, ringed by dark bruises. Kayla was trying to hold the broken plank in place, but he was stronger than her. I scrambled to help, pressing my weight against the board. Boone snarled and lunged at Jason's arm, latching on. For a moment, Jason's expression flickered as if he felt pain, but it quickly reverted to that vacant grin. "We told you to stay," he rasped. "Why did you run?" I clenched my teeth. The combined strength of me, Kayla, and Boone was barely enough to hold him back. Another voice, the woman's voice, sounded from outside. "Evan! Let me in, let me in." Terror coursed through my veins. If they forced their way in, we were done. I scanned the cabin. In one corner lay a rusted shovel. Abandoning the plank for half a second, I lunged and grabbed it. Kayla lost ground as Jason shoved the plank aside, his head and shoulders thrust into the cabin. He reeked of decay, with a roar I didn't know I was capable of. I swung the shovel at Jason's head. The impact was sickening. Bone cracked. He let out a strangled snarl. Kayla yanked the plank back into place, and for an instant, Jason was pinned by the wood. I swung again, connecting with his chest. He made a horrible gargling sound, then went limp, sagging half in, half out of the cabin. Kayla scrambled back, eyes wide with horror. Boone barked once, uncertain. The portion of Jason's face we could see was mashed and bloody, yet his eyes kept flicking open and shut, as though he was still alive. I struck him again, sobbing in fury and fear, until his movements stopped. Then, with Kayla's help, I shoved him outside. We replaced the plank, breathing raggedly, tears streaming down both our faces. Outside, the woman howled like a banshee in mourning, and we heard what sounded like fists or nails scraping at the walls. The cabin shook. My mind fractured. Kayla clutched at me, burying her face in my shoulder, while Boone barked and whimpered, dancing in agitation. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe an hour, but eventually the commotion subsided. Silence. We stayed there, huddled in the dark, for an eternity. No more scraping, no more howling. I thought about pushing out to find my car, but fear of the woman's next attack kept me rooted. Finally, exhaustion overcame us again, and we dozed off in shifts. Sometime later, my watch read 1:03 p.m., but it was meaningless in the everlasting twilight. I woke to find Kayla shaking me. "Evan," she whispered, "look." She pointed to a corner of the cabin. Boone was gone. The plank over the window was still in place, no sign of forced entry. We scanned the small interior. No dog. My heart sank. Had the door been unlocked? We checked. Still chained from the inside, Boone was simply gone? Kayla started crying softly, murmuring that we had to find him. The dog had been her one comfort after everything. I felt like the bottom had dropped out of my stomach. How could he have vanished without a sound? We debated whether to go outside. The thought of that woman or Jason's reanimated corpse lurking out there made me sick, but if Boone was in trouble, I couldn't abandon him. Reluctantly, I pried the board from the window, peered out. The clearing was still and empty. Jason's body was gone too. Only a smudge of blackish blood on the grass indicated anything had happened. Shaking, we climbed out. The air carried a foul odor, like stagnant water and rotted meat. Kayla clutched the shovel we'd used on Jason, while I gripped my hunting knife. We circled the cabin, calling Boone's name softly. No response. A part of me wondered if he had simply dematerialized, spirited away by whatever haunted these woods. Then a bark echoed from the tree line, soft and plaintive. Kayla and I hurried toward the sound. Boone emerged, tail wagging, bounding up to us as if nothing was wrong. But the moment I looked into his eyes, my heart froze. They weren't the deep brown I'd known, they were milky, almost cloudy. He also didn't respond to his name. When I patted his flank, he barely acknowledged it. Kayla reached out to pet him, and he jerked away, turning his head in a slow, unnatural movement. "Oh, God," Kayla whispered, stepping back. "Something's wrong with him." I knelt, calling his name softly. Boone stared at me, unblinking. I touched his fur and found it cold, like a wet rag in winter. He let out a tiny whine, but it sounded more human than canine. My stomach churned. That's when he trotted right past us, heading back toward the cabin. Kayla and I exchanged looks, then followed at a distance. My beloved dog acted like a stranger, as though a puppet was pulling his strings. Once inside the cabin, he nosed around at the corners, sniffing. I tried to approach, but he gave a low growl. That was so out of character for him, I almost cried on the spot. We tried to come up with a plan. Was it possible to continue searching for the road with this dog who wasn't quite Boone anymore? Part of me wanted to leave him behind. I know that sounds awful, but I was scared he'd turn on us. But I couldn't. He'd been my companion for years. So we decided we'd take him with us, no matter the risk. With no other recourse, we gathered a few scraps of supplies from the cabin and set off along the logging track again. The unwavering twilight overhead gave no clue to time. Kayla began humming under her breath. A nervous habit, she said. Oddly, it resembled the lullaby Jason had been humming. That gave me the chills, but I didn't mention it. We must have walked for miles. The path meandered past a dried stream bed, some collapsed wooden structures that might once have been logger shacks, and endless rows of pine. At one point, Kayla pointed to the distance. "Is that a road sign?" My heart leapt. We hurried forward, but when we got closer, we found only an old metal sign reading, "Keep out," rusted and bullet-ridden. Boone, or the thing that looked like Boone, started whining. He sniffed at the ground, circling anxiously. Suddenly, he lifted his head and barked, staring off into the gloom. That's when I heard footsteps again, coming from the direction we'd just traveled. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it, like a pressure in the air, a hateful gaze on the back of my neck. We broke into a run, adrenaline surging. My legs felt leaden, but fear can push you far. Kayla stumbled after a few dozen yards, scraping her knee. I hoisted her up. She kept muttering, "It's behind us. It's behind us." I risked a quick glance and glimpsed a shape standing by the bullet-ridden sign. Tall, gaunt, with hair blowing in an absent wind. The woman again, or something even older, wearing her face. Her arms hung like broken branches. Even from that distance, I sensed her fury. We ran on until we reached a slope of loose gravel that dropped down sharply. At the bottom, shining in the dim light, was something metal. The hood of a car. My Subaru? My heart leapt so violently I thought I might pass out. I slid down the slope, Kayla behind me. Sure enough, it was my Subaru, parked just as I'd left it. Except the area looked different, overgrown, wilder. As if the forest had grown around the vehicle in a matter of days or weeks. Keys trembling in my hand, I jammed them into the lock. We clambered inside, slamming the doors behind us. Boone stood outside for a moment, gazing through the window with those cloudy eyes. Kayla tried to open the back door for him, but I hesitated. I couldn't believe I was considering leaving him. Then, tears stinging my eyes, I unlocked the back door. He jumped in, wagging his tail once in a bizarre, stiff motion. I turned the ignition. Incredibly, the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The headlights illuminated the trees in front of us, revealing a winding dirt path that might once have been the road. With no time to spare, I floored it. The car jolted forward, rocks and branches scraping the undercarriage. Kayla flinched at every bump, clinging to the dash. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman at the top of the slope, standing eerily still, her mouth open. A distant shriek reached us, but it was drowned by the Subaru's engine. We thundered down the path at a reckless speed, the headlights dancing over pine trunks and weeds. It felt like we were riding a roller coaster in a tunnel that never ended. Then, out of nowhere, the trees parted, and we burst onto a paved road. The sudden smoothness jolted my senses. I recognized it from the drive-in, a county highway. My breath came in ragged gulps as I slowed the car, heart pounding. Kayla sobbed in relief, burying her face in her hands. In the back seat, Boone sat stoic, unblinking. I kept the car rolling, refusing to stop until we found ourselves near a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. The neon sign read Wedgefield Gas and Grocery, a place I vaguely remembered passing on my way in. I parked near the pump, and Kayla nearly fell out of the passenger door. Boone remained in the back, staring at me. I avoided his eyes. We stumbled inside the station, disheveled, covered in grime and blood. The clerk gaped. Kayla tried to explain we were lost, but her words tumbled out in a nonsensical avalanche. I took over, lying that we'd had a hiking accident and needed help. As I spoke, I checked my phone. Miraculously, it lit up. It was Sunday morning, apparently. The date shown was more than a week after I first set out. A week had passed, yet by my own count it felt like maybe 3 or 4 days at most. My entire sense of reality tilted. The clerk called an ambulance. Kayla was loaded onto a stretcher, tears streaming as paramedics asked her questions. She just kept saying, "He tried to kill me, he tried to kill me," and it was the forest. I gave a separate, calmer statement to the police, claiming we'd been separated from a friend, but I stopped short of telling them the full truth. They wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. I insisted on taking Boone to a vet on my own. Kayla left in the ambulance for the nearest hospital. We parted ways with a silent hug. There were no words for what we'd been through. I never found a veterinarian open that early in the morning, so I drove home. Boone sat quietly in the back, occasionally letting out a low whine. By the time we reached Asheville, he seemed almost normal, like a dog just exhausted from a brutal camping trip. His eyes cleared up a bit, though they never fully returned to their old color. The nightmares started that same night. I dreamt of the woman's rotted face, of Jason's possessed grin, of the forest that refused to see daylight. More than once, I woke to Boone staring at me from the corner of my bedroom, silent and still, and for a terrifying second I thought I saw a flicker of blackness in his eyes. In the days that followed, Kayla and I exchanged a few texts. She was discharged from the hospital with minor injuries and severe stress response, the doctors said. No one believed her stories. She eventually stopped replying to my messages, maybe because she wanted to forget, or maybe because seeing my name triggered memories too painful to bear. Jason's body was never recovered. The official word was that he fell off a ravine or got lost in the forest. A search was conducted but turned up nothing. I kept my mouth shut. What could I say? That I'd stabbed him because he was possessed by a rotting banshee? At times, I wonder if the woman truly was a banshee or some other entity, if she somehow twisted time in that patch of forest, feeding on fear and despair. And I wonder if a piece of her didn't follow me home through Boone. He's still with me, though he sleeps more, and sometimes I catch him staring into corners, whining at nothing. His eyes never quite return to normal. The vet says he's healthy enough physically, but there's a hollowness there that breaks my heart. I haven't tried to go back. I never will. I can't read any more about Sumter National Forest, can't look at photos, can't even bear the smell of pine without remembering the suffocating hush. Every so often, when the wind howls in Asheville, it sounds like a voice moaning my name. I tell myself it's just the wind. But in those dark, unguarded moments, I remember the taste of rot in the air, the twist of time that trapped us in eternal twilight, the friend I had to kill, and I remember the final expression on that woman's face as we drove away, her mouth open in a silent scream. That's when I realize, maybe I never really left. A piece of me might still be wandering those twisting trails, searching desperately for a dawn that refuses to rise. I'm 31, and this happened in June 2024. Ever since, I've tried to piece my life back together, to bury the nightmares in routine. But each night as I drift off, I feel the forest creeping in. One day, I fear it'll call me back for good. If you find yourself drawn to remote corners of Sumter National Forest, if you hear whispers in the twilight and see a figure with outstretched arms, do yourself a favor, leave. Don't wait for morning, don't hope for rescue, just run. Because once she sets her sights on you, there's no guarantee you'll ever see the sun again. My name is Tom Granger. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in March of 2025. I'm not a war veteran or any kind of rugged survivalist, but I do love the outdoors. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and had always spent weekends exploring local trails and state parks. I never imagined something so horrifying could happen so close to home, especially on Sassafras Mountain, right there in South Carolina. But it did, and I haven't been the same since. I'll start by telling you why I went up there in the first place. My younger brother, Will, died earlier that year. He took his own life, and I never saw it coming. One day, he was asking me about my latest design project. He was always supportive of my freelance graphic design work, and the next I was getting a phone call from the county coroner. Will and I were close, but I missed all the signs he was in trouble. I felt intense guilt. Could I have stopped him? Should I have called him more often? My mind kept spinning with that question for weeks. Finally, I decided I needed closure. Will and I had once hiked Sassafras Mountain when we were kids, with our parents on a bright summer weekend. I still remember him perched on a rock outcropping, pointing out the scenic view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He'd wanted to come back one day, we both had. After he died, I realized we never got around to it. So, I loaded up my car, grabbed my dog Rufus, and drove north into South Carolina with Will's ashes sealed in a small box. My plan was to scatter them at sunrise and say a final goodbye. The drive should have taken 3 hours, but somehow, I got turned around on back roads, even though I had driven them once before. My phone battery dropped from 80% to 5% in a matter of minutes. I swear it wasn't that old of a phone, it never died that fast. Nonetheless, the device shut off, leaving me with a physical map I'd printed out at home. Trouble was, I started noticing that the map didn't quite match the roads I was on. Street names were missing, or it felt like I was passing the same farmland repeatedly. An odd, creeping sense of déjà vu grew with every mile. Only when I spotted a small hand-painted sign reading Sassafras MTN did I feel a glimmer of relief. I followed that sign onto a narrow, winding road lined with tall pines on either side. At the trailhead, I parked my old Subaru. The place felt unusually still. There were no other cars, which I suppose wasn't too strange. It was a weekday in March, but it struck me as quiet, too quiet. Rufus, my big black lab with a sweet temperament, hopped out, wagging his tail. I loaded my gear, a single tent, 2 days' worth of food, a water filtration kit, Will's ashes, and a few small items that reminded me of him. I tucked them into my backpack. Rufus sniffed around the trailhead sign while I carefully traced the path on my map, noticing that it was labeled Sassafras Summit. A park ranger I'd once spoken to said this was an easy-to-moderate hike, so I had no reservations. Still, the sun hovered higher in the sky than I expected, which meant my phone must have died earlier than midday. Time felt a bit off. Shaking the thought away, I locked my car and we started in. Almost immediately, the trail felt strange. The path was clear, but the vegetation seemed overgrown for early spring. Twisting vines hung from trees, and the ground was covered with wet leaves that seemed to swallow the footpath. I kept glancing at my watch. It was an old analog watch Will gave me. The second hand kept ticking forward, but the minute hand seemed to jump every so often, as though skipping a few increments. I tapped it a few times, blaming the battery, but my watch was brand new. It made no sense. Rufus led the way, occasionally looking back at me, tail wagging. But as we got deeper into the forest, he became more cautious, sniffing the air with his ears pricked. After an hour of hiking, I found a decent campsite near a small clearing. The ground was mostly level, ringed by thick pines and rocky outcroppings. Even though my original plan was to push on to the summit, the weird sense of time distortion and the steadily dropping sun convinced me to set up camp now. I wanted daylight for pitching my tent. I gathered some branches for a fire, but the moment I got it going, it sputtered out. Even with dry tinder and a proper fire starter, the flames acted as though the logs were soaked in water. After multiple attempts, it finally caught, though it burned in strange colors. Blue, then green, then flickering red. Rufus sat a few feet away, whining, ears flattened against his head. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked. He just stared into the darkening forest beyond. Supper was a quick can of chili heated in a small pot. The entire time, I felt like the woods were watching me. Every gust of wind through the branches sounded like whispering voices. I tried to rationalize it. Rustling leaves often sound eerie at night, but it was more than that. There was a pattern to those whispers, like a conversation just out of earshot. Even Rufus kept glancing at the tree line with unsettled eyes. After eating, I carefully took Will's ashes out of my pack, set them on a small rock, and told him I would scatter them at sunrise the next day. It felt right, the symbolic new day. By then it was fully dark. I double-checked the perimeter of the campsite for anything suspicious. Finding nothing, I zipped myself into my tent with Rufus at my feet. The night grew colder than expected. My watch read 9:14 p.m. when I closed my eyes. I was sure I hadn't even dozed off yet when I heard scratching against the outside of the tent. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart pounding. Rufus was wide awake, staring at the tent wall. The scratching circled around the nylon as if someone or something was dragging their fingernails around the entire tent. Then it stopped. Rufus let out a low, guttural growl. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine a flashlight out. Nothing. No raccoons, no possums, no sign of an animal at all. I tried to keep my breathing steady. "It's fine, buddy," I lied, patting Rufus's head. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me because the next thing I remember is waking up in an empty sleeping bag. Rufus was gone. My watch read 6:23 a.m., but the sky was still pitch black with no hint of dawn. The zipper of my sleeping bag was undone from the inside. Panicking, I scrambled out of the tent calling for Rufus. He was nowhere, and my entire campsite had changed. The embers of last night's fire were cold, as if it had been days since it burned. My backpack was gone. All that remained were some scattered wrappers from the chili can, my water bottle, and Will's ashes. Still on the rock, but coated in a thick layer of dust, like they'd been sitting there untouched for months. "Rufus!" I shouted. My voice cracked in the cold morning air, but it didn't echo. It just seemed to die among the trees. No answer. I began to run through the forest, scanning for signs of him, calling his name. After a few minutes of frantic searching, I saw a black silhouette limping toward me from the direction of a boulder. "Rufus!" I sprinted forward. It was indeed Rufus, but something about him was off. He didn't bound up or wag his tail. He walked slowly, stiffly, and stared at me with an odd blankness in his eyes. "Hey, buddy, where'd you go?" I whispered. He blinked once, then licked his lips. When I reached to pat his head, he flinched away. A low whine emerged from his throat, but his lips pulled back into what could almost be called a grin. It lasted too long to be natural. I didn't know what else to do except lead him back to camp. He followed silently, footsteps heavier than usual, and I swear he was staring at me like he didn't know who I was. Returning to the campsite, I realized with horror that all my gear was missing. Tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, everything. The only things left behind were the half-rotted remains of the chili can and a battered flashlight near the trunk of a tree. A note of wild confusion overcame me. I had no phone, no gear, no sense of how the entire campsite could vanish in one night. It just wasn't possible. Yet, there we were. Desperate, I decided to push on to the summit. Maybe I'd find other hikers or get enough cell reception to call for help. I'd scatter Will's ashes up there anyway. Tucking the small box under my arm, I took the half-functional flashlight and started up the trail. The sky was still black, but my watch insisted it was 6:40 a.m. Rufus followed, staring ahead as though guided by something else. He didn't once bark or sniff the ground as we walked. It felt like I'd been walking for hours, but the horizon never brightened. I passed a few fallen logs and recognized them as landmarks from the day before. It was surreal. I was apparently going forward, but everything looked the same. My body started trembling with an inexplicable cold that bit through my jacket. Then I noticed footprints on the trail. Not paw prints, human footprints, barefoot, pressing deeply into the mud as if someone with a heavy stride had gone through. I carefully placed my own foot next to one of them. The bare footprints were larger than mine, the toes splayed wide. Leading the way, Rufus suddenly lifted his nose and let out a single excited bark, then trotted off the main trail. He disappeared among thick brambles. I chased him, stumbling over exposed roots, tearing my pants on briars. "Rufus, wait!" I emerged into a small clearing, my hands scratched and stinging. Rufus was standing rigid by a huge oak tree. There, leaning casually against the trunk, was a man, or at least it looked like a man at first glance. Tall, slim, wearing a charcoal suit with no shoes. He had dark hair slicked back, a youthful face with a slight smile. In fact, he looked disconcertingly like my brother Will, only if Will had grown older in a strangely perfect way. Sharper cheekbones, radiant skin, and unnerving intensity in the eyes. "Tom," he said. My heart turned to ice in my chest. That was Will's voice, or close to it. I couldn't speak. I wanted to call him Will, but something about him was too refined, too smooth. "You came," he continued, stepping forward. Rufus wagged his tail once, and I felt my stomach churn in confusion. Why was my dog comfortable around this stranger? I finally managed, "Who are you?" My voice trembled. "How do you know my name?" The stranger tilted his head. "We've known each other a very long time," he said. He reached out a hand as though beckoning me. "I'm your friend." It was then I noticed the footprints on the ground matched his size. He was barefoot, the skin of his feet pale and unblemished despite the rough forest floor. My mind raced. A lost hiker wearing a suit? Impossible. Was this some sort of bizarre fever dream? "I don't know you," I murmured, heart pounding. "What do you want?" His eyes flicked to the small box of Will's ashes under my arm. A grin spread across his face, too broad to be human. "I want what you came to give," he said calmly. "And I want your guilt, your sorrow. You carry far more than you need. Leave it here with me and you can stay." My entire body shook. I was half convinced I was hallucinating, but everything felt so real. My raw scratches, the cold air, the pounding of my heart. "Stay with you." "Where?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled that same impossibly wide grin, and his mouth parted just enough for me to see that his teeth were all the same shape, like uniformly pointed incisors. When I stepped back, he made no move to follow, simply said, "I've waited for you. Your brother wanted you here too." The mention of Will snapped me back. "You don't get to talk about my brother," I barked, voice sharp with anger and fear. I glanced at Rufus. My dog was quietly panting, tail drooping, making no sign of aggression towards this man. "Rufus," I commanded, "come." But he didn't move. I staggered backward away from the clearing and turned to run. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I felt a presence chasing me all the same. Between the dense trees, I lost my footing and slid down a small embankment. Mud and gravel tore at my palms. I stumbled to my feet, scanning for Rufus or the stranger. Nothing but the hush of the forest. My watch read 6:41 a.m. A single minute had passed, yet I'd been there at least 15 minutes. The second hand ticked forward in a normal rhythm, but the minute hand hardly moved. Teeth chattering, I realized my box of ashes was missing. In the scramble, I must have dropped it. Panic seized my chest. That box was the last remains of my brother. Fear or not, I had to go back. I forced myself up the embankment again, heart pounding. But the clearing was empty. No trace of the barefoot man, no sign of Rufus, only the thick mud patterned with footprints. My own footprints, the man's, and paw prints of the dog. Except the footprints kept going in a circle. I followed them once, twice, before realizing they formed a closed loop around the oak tree. No break. It defied logic. Frantic, I rummaged in the brambles where I'd fallen. There, half buried in the mud, was the box. The lid was ripped off. The ashes were scattered, forming a smeared symbol on the ground. A loop with a slash, reminiscent of an Ouroboros or some strange rune. Gritting my teeth, I tried to brush them back into the container. They clung to the wet dirt. I tried to gather what I could, tears stinging my eyes. I whispered, "I'm so sorry, Will, I'm so sorry." My freezing hands could only salvage maybe half of what used to be in the box. Suddenly, a coarse laugh echoed among the pines. I whipped around, but no one was there. Clutching the half-filled box to my chest, I plowed through the forest, ignoring the trail. I just needed to put distance between me and that clearing. Branches whipped against my face, drawing shallow cuts. My breath came out in ragged gasps. Maybe if I found the summit, I could find other hikers or some vantage point. Adrenaline and terror drove me forward. Eventually, I stumbled onto a faint side path. It looked older, less traveled, with moss covering what used to be a trail sign. The sign lay on its side, the paint worn away to near illegibility. It might have said Summit 1 mile at some point. I pressed on, noticing that the temperature seemed to drop further. My breath fogged in front of me. The sun still hadn't risen. The darkness felt endless. Then, from behind a thick trunk, Rufus stepped out. I almost wept with relief. "Good boy," I said, trying to muster warmth in my voice. But he just stared at me with that same eerie gaze. No tail wag, no sign of recognition. I reached out a hand slowly, palm up. He bared his teeth, not a snarl, but something akin to a smile. Then he emitted a sound, half whimper, half growl, and trotted past me along the path, heading deeper into the forest. I followed him, unsure what else to do. About 15 minutes of winding trail later, if time even worked here, we reached a small campsite. To my shock, it appeared identical to my setup from the previous night. Same brand of tent, same arrangement of stones around the fire ring, only it looked old and abandoned, covered in moss. My gut twisted. It's impossible, I thought. Yet there it was. The tent door sagged open, the sleeping bag inside tattered and mildewed. A battered can of chili lay rusting near the cold fire pit. The stench of decay hung in the air, so foul it made my eyes water. For reasons I still can't fully explain, I stepped inside that tent. A swirl of dead leaves crunched under my boots. My sleeping bag looked as though it had been in there for months, shredded by rodents, mold creeping across the fabric. Then I spotted the shimmer of something metallic in the corner. My watch. I froze, unable to process this. I was wearing my watch on my wrist right now. Slowly, I reached down to pick up the watch on the ground. It was stopped at 9:14, exactly the time I'd tried to go to sleep the night before. My mouth went dry. I lifted my left arm. My watch there continued ticking, but the minute hand had advanced only slightly to 6:43 a.m. Behind me, I heard a huff of breath. I spun to see Rufus standing at the tent door, his eyes gleaming in the faint glow of my flashlight. He let out a guttural noise unlike anything I'd ever heard from a dog. Then he turned and ran off. Swallowing my fear, I followed him again, stumbling over roots, pushing aside branches. I refused to lose him. I'd already lost my brother. I wouldn't lose Rufus too, not like this. Abruptly, the terrain shifted from forest floor to rocky outcropping. I found myself on a ledge with a panoramic view of far-off ridges. There, in the distance, was the faint glow of dawn, the first sign of any real daylight. But it was the strangest sunrise I'd ever seen. The sky to the east had a faint, hazy orange, while overhead remained pitch black, scattered with stars. It was like time itself had broken in half. Standing near the edge of the ledge, that tall man in the charcoal suit appeared again. standing so still I might have mistaken him for a statue if not for the slow tilt of his head. "You're looking for an end," he said softly. "You won't find it like this. Not without me." I glanced around for Rufus, but the dog was nowhere to be seen. "Where's my dog?" I demanded, ignoring the creature's question. "What have you done to him?" "You cling to attachments," the man said, taking a few steps closer. His barefoot steps made no sound on the rock. "You hold guilt, regret, longing. You've been carrying your brother's ashes, but you carry so much more than that, a weight that consumes you." "Give me back my dog," I hissed, stumbling backward. My foot slipped near the edge, sending a cascade of pebbles down into the darkness below. "And I don't know who you are, but—" He cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Your brother wanted you here," he repeated. "And you came. Will was so close to staying, you know. I almost had him before he took his final exit on his own." Rage shot through me. "Don't you dare talk about my brother," I shouted, lunging forward. My fists swung, but the man slid aside effortlessly, almost gliding. He gave me a pitying look, then seized my wrist in a grip of iron. I felt the bones grind together. Gasping, I tried to twist free. He released me with a sudden push, sending me sprawling onto the rock. Pain flared in my side as I landed. "There's a part of you that wants this," he whispered, stepping over me. "The part that's ready to give in, just like Will did." Tears streaked my face unbidden. "Shut up," I choked. My voice cracked with grief. He knelt so close I could smell something sweet and rotting on his breath. "Stay with me," he murmured almost gently. "There's no suffering here, only an endless hush." I forced myself to stand, ignoring the throbbing in my side. Summoning every ounce of will, I spat in his face. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the sky flickered from black to a blood-red hue. Thunder rumbled somewhere deep beneath the ground, as if the mountain itself was moaning in pain. "I'll find Rufus," I said, stepping back toward the tree line. "I'll bury my brother's ashes, and I'll get out of here." The moment I said it, I felt a surge of defiance, almost like a spark of normal reality. He watched me go, that chilling grin returning. "You can try," he said. His voice echoed around me in 100 overlapping tones. As I turned to flee, I heard him murmur, "But time is mine." Back among the trees, I realized my left wrist was throbbing. Removing my glove, I saw the faint imprint of a hand burned into my flesh, a red silhouette the shape of his fingers. The skin was hot, but the rest of me felt cold. Shuddering, I pressed on, calling for Rufus in a hoarse whisper. I walked, I don't know how long, hours maybe. Branches scraped my arms and snagged my jacket. At times, I thought I heard voices drifting from behind me. My mother's voice calling me for dinner. Will's laughter from when we were kids. The forest was playing with my senses. My watch continued to mark 6:43 a.m. overhead. The sky had turned from black to a hazy purplish dawn, but the light never grew stronger. Eventually, I stumbled into another clearing, smaller than the first. At the center was a stone fire ring, unlit. By that ring, lying face down on the ground, was Rufus. A shock of relief and terror raced through me. I sprinted over, dropping to my knees beside him. He wasn't moving. My breath stuck in my throat as I gently turned him over. His eyes were half open, unfocused. Blood stained the fur along his front paws. Had he fought with an animal? For a moment, I feared he was dead. Then he let out a faint whine and blinked. My heart soared with relief. "Rufus," I murmured. "Hey, it's me." He looked at me, and for a brief moment genuine recognition lit his eyes. He licked my face weakly. I almost cried, hugging his big head to my chest. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm going to get you out of here." The dog trembled, his gaze flicking around as though expecting something else to leap out. I gently lifted him to his feet. He limped badly on his back leg. I realized I had no first aid kit. Everything was gone. But as we stood, the ashes of a fire in the ring behind me suddenly ignited, sending a swirl of red embers into the air. I jumped, clutching Rufus. The flames burned an eerie maroon color without any wood fueling them. From the swirling smoke, I saw a figure forming. I dragged Rufus backward, stumbling. The figure was a silhouette at first, but then it coalesced into a shape. Me. It had my face, my clothing, but its eyes were hollow sockets, and it flickered like a projection. It lifted an arm, beckoning me. In my own voice, it whispered, "Tom, you have to stay. You owe it to him." "No," I rasped, fighting the urge to look away. The figure advanced, gliding across the ground. My mind spun. Was this another trick from that barefoot man, or was this place itself alive? I bent down, groping for a stone or branch, anything to defend myself. My fingers wrapped around a sharp piece of rock about the size of my fist. The flickering double of me hissed, "You don't get to walk away from Will. You left him alone." Rage and sorrow boiled up inside me. I hurled the rock, striking the figure in the chest. It shattered into whirling embers and collapsed into the flames, which died instantly, leaving the clearing in silent gloom. Panting, I realized how badly I was shaking. In my arms, Rufus whimpered softly, but it was a real whimper this time, not that unnatural sound from before. Somehow, that gave me a sliver of hope. He was still my dog, battered and scared, but alive. I wanted off this mountain. I didn't care about scattering the rest of Will's ashes in any ceremonial sense. I just wanted out. To survive. To ensure I didn't join my brother in the same doomed place. If there was any chance of reaching a road or a ranger station, I had to keep moving. The trouble was, the terrain made no sense. The usual signs, moss on the north side of trees, the slope of the mountain, weren't reliable. Everything felt twisted around. The whorls in the bark, the location of the pine needles on the ground. I'd turn in one direction, only to find myself back where I started. In the distance, I heard a faint rustling that might have been footsteps. As I trudged forward with Rufus limping alongside me, I tried to watch the sky. The faint glow of dawn hung there, never growing or fading. My analog watch was worthless. It still claimed it was 6:43. I considered leaving it behind, but it was one of my last ties to reality, a reminder that time should be moving, even if it refused to do so here. We came to a massive fallen log bridging a shallow ravine. Just beyond it, I recognized the shape of something metallic, a battered old water fountain station and a sign marking the summit. Relief flooded me. If that was the summit sign, maybe we'd find a parking area or an observation deck. "Come on, boy," I urged Rufus. Crossing the log was precarious. Rufus struggled with his back leg, and I ended up half carrying him. Halfway across, the log trembled, then cracked. We plummeted into the ravine a few feet below, landing in soft mud. I twisted my ankle on impact, yelping in pain. Rufus let out a sharp bark of surprise. Gasping, we scrambled up the other side, ignoring the shriek of protest from my ankle. I needed to keep going. The sign was close. Reaching level ground again, we found a short path leading to a small observation platform, the official summit marker. Wooden railings offered a panoramic view over the forest. But as soon as I laid eyes on it, my stomach lurched. The entire platform looked abandoned, sagging to one side. Bits of tattered cloth, maybe old flags, hung from the corners, torn to ribbons. The structure swayed in a wind I hadn't noticed before. And no one was there, no hikers, no rangers, just emptiness. Cautiously, I limped onto the platform, leaning on the rickety railing. The horizon displayed a swirling gradient of deep night on one side and perpetual sunrise on the other. The sight made my head spin. It was as if the world was stuck between two times of day, never shifting. When I looked down at my watch, I saw with a surge of panic that the second hand was now going backwards in staccato jumps, the minute hand creeping forward by jerky increments. Behind me, Rufus growled. A low, continuous rumble. I spun around to see the man in the charcoal suit standing at the far end of the platform. Even in the partial light, I could see him more clearly now. His face was inhumanly perfect, pores non-existent, no wrinkles or blemishes. Just smooth skin stretched over a bone structure that felt slightly too angular. His lips pulled back from those identical pointed teeth. "You're at the top of nothing," he said, "and you'll never leave unless you surrender what I want." I swallowed. "What do you want from me?" My voice trembled with a mixture of fear and anger. His black eyes shifted to the box of ashes I still clutched. "We had a deal, your brother and I, but he wavered at the end, took matters into his own hands. I was so close to claiming him." He paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, "but he left behind a tether, you, and now I have you both." I shook my head, refusing to believe my brother had made some kind of pact with this abomination. "You're lying." He shrugged, smiling that too wide grin. "Does it matter? If you want to keep living in your world, Tom, you must leave behind the grief tying you here. You must let go of your last illusions, or you remain." I felt a cold fury in my chest. Was this entire nightmare a twisted metaphor for me letting go of Will? Or was it a literal, eldritch presence trying to feed on my despair? "I'm not going to be your prisoner," I spat, "and I'm sure as hell not letting you feed on my guilt." He laughed softly, a sound that made the air vibrate. "You've already fed me plenty, Tom." As he stepped closer, I could see dark veins pulsing under his jawline. "But you can always give me more." In a flash, he was on me, claw-like hands gripping my shoulders. I fought back, swinging my flashlight at his head. It connected with a solid crack, and for a moment, his face twisted in fury, giving me a glimpse of something monstrous beneath the human facade. A skull too long, eye sockets recessed. He hissed, stumbling backward. I took the opportunity to yank a splintered board from the railing, brandishing it like a weapon. Rufus barked and lunged, teeth snapping at the man's ankle. The creature kicked him away with an unnatural force. Rufus slammed into the wooden boards with a yelp. Anger flared in me. I lunged forward, thrusting the jagged board at the man's midsection. He recoiled, but the board struck home, piercing what should have been flesh. A gush of thick, dark fluid poured out, steaming in the cold air. He let out a screech that rattled my teeth, grabbing at the plank to pull it free. While he was distracted, I scooped Rufus into my arms and ran off the platform, ignoring the searing pain in my twisted ankle. Behind me, I heard the man screaming. The entire platform began to shake as if an earthquake was hitting the mountain. Wood snapped. Another unearthly wail rang out, then a tremendous crash. I risked a glance back to see the entire observation deck collapsing into the ravine in a cloud of dust and splintered boards, the man in the suit nowhere to be seen. I paused, panting. Had I killed him? Could such a thing even be killed? Rufus whimpered in my arms, but he was still breathing. I staggered along a narrow path away from the ruin, scanning for any sign of an exit. That's when I noticed a glint of metal at the tree line, the guardrail of a small gravel parking lot. My heart soared. Maybe it was the official summit parking area or a vantage point. Half limping, half running, I reached the guardrail. Sure enough, it overlooked a small clearing with a single-lane road disappearing into the woods. Relief nearly buckled my knees. There was an old battered sign that read Sassafras Matian Overlook. I hurried down the slope, calling out in a cracked voice, "Hello, anyone?" But it was deserted. A single weather-beaten sedan was parked near the edge of the lot, caked in dirt. The windows were too grimy to see inside. I approached, hopeful to find some keys or even a phone. The driver's side door was unlocked, swinging open with a long groan. The seat was torn, and the dashboard covered in dust. On the passenger seat lay a park ranger's badge, half buried under leaves that had blown in. It read, "Badge No 104, Ranger Bansha." Next to it was an old brochure from the 1990s, advertising Sassafras Mountain as highest point in SC with bright cartoonish fonts. I tried to turn on the car ignition, but the key wasn't there. The entire console was dead. Out of options, I sank to the ground next to the car, adrenaline draining away, leaving me trembling and exhausted. Rufus leaned against my side, still whining softly. Finally, tears came, the unstoppable flood of terror and sorrow. Will was gone, but his ashes were in the battered box by my side, half empty. My dog was wounded, possibly possessed or changed. I had no phone, no working sense of direction, and the entire mountain felt like it was under the influence of some unimaginable entity. I rocked back and forth, pressing my forehead against the car door, trying to keep warm. Rufus's fur was stiff with the drying blood. "I'm sorry, buddy," I whispered, stroking his back. "We'll get through this." My watch, still on my wrist, read 6:44 a.m., the second hand spinning backward lazily. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours, yet the sky never fully brightened. When a flicker of movement caught my eye, I jerked upright. Emerging from the trees was a search and rescue team. At least, that's what I first assumed. 3 figures wearing reflective jackets, carrying flashlights, calling out, "Hello, is someone there?" My heart soared. "I'm here!" I shouted, getting unsteadily to my feet. "My dog is hurt, please!" As they got closer, I noticed their jackets were muddy and torn, their faces hollow-eyed. One had a large gash across the cheek. Another was missing a shoe, limping across the gravel. "You're Tom Granger?" asked the nearest one, a tall woman with short dark hair. She had an odd, monotone voice. "We've been searching for you. You've been missing for months." "Months?" I repeated, throat tightening. "That's not possible. It's only been—" Before I could finish, the second figure stepped closer. Their eyes glinted in the flashlight beam, black and empty. "Come with us," they said in unison, voices blending. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This was wrong. Their movements were too synchronized. They might have once been actual rescuers, but they were hollow now, puppeted by the same presence. I scrambled backward, holding Rufus tight. "Get away!" I warned, voice trembling. They advanced in an eerily smooth manner, ignoring my words. Suddenly, a figure burst out from the tree line. A real person, I think. A gray-haired woman wearing a bright orange hunter's vest, face streaked with sweat and fear. She pointed a shotgun at the 3 rescuers. "Back off," she roared. Her accent was local, a harsh drawl. The creatures turned to her with slow, doll-like precision. They hissed, retreating a few steps. She fired once into the air, the blast echoing across the lot. The 3 figures collapsed into writhing shadows that vanished into the trees. "Holy hell," she spat, lowering the shotgun. She looked at me and the dog with wide eyes. "What in God's name are you doing up here, son?" I stared in disbelief. I got lost, my brother's ashes." My words tumbled out incoherently. She didn't seem shocked by the bizarre phenomenon. Grabbing my arm, she pulled me toward the battered sedan. "We gotta move, come on, they'll be back. There's an old forest road about half a mile that way. My truck's parked there." She eyed my dog's wound. "He looks rough, but I can try to help. Don't you give up on him." Not knowing if I should trust her, I had no better option. She nodded for me to follow, then set off at a brisk pace back into the trees. I limped after her, Rufus hobbling. Despite the lingering terror, a spark of hope flickered in me. We wound through the forest, the old woman scanning the surroundings with an almost preternatural awareness. Every now and then I heard the faint rustle of leaves behind us, as though something was trailing at the edge of hearing. We reached a narrow dirt road blocked by a fallen pine. On the other side of that pine was a red pickup truck. She urged me to climb over, carefully guiding Rufus. The dog let out a pained yelp but managed. She unlocked the doors, then rummaged in the back seat for a battered first aid kit. "Name's Harriet," she said curtly, pressing gauze to Rufus's wounds. "I get up to these woods sometimes to keep an eye out for folks like you. Let's just say the mountain's got a bad reputation for luring people." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but all that came out was, "How do we get out?" Harriet grimaced. "The road might twist on you or vanish. You need to keep your mind sharp. Focus on what's real." She eyed the small box of ashes in my arms. "That burden there, maybe that's what's tethering you. Could be your grief has given them power." I stared down at the box. The top was off kilter, the ashes half missing. I felt tears rising again, but Harriet was already starting the truck. "Hold on," she said. "We'll try to outrun it. Sometimes that works." We drove, the tires crunching along the dirt path. Just as Harriet said, the road shifted bizarrely. One moment it seemed to stretch out straight, the next it bent around the side of a cliff I was sure hadn't been there seconds before. She cursed under her breath, white-knuckling the wheel, determined to keep forward momentum. Rufus lay in my lap, whining softly. I stroked his head, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it would ever be okay again. At a bend in the road, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the lane. The charcoal-suited man, bleeding dark fluid from his midsection, eyes lit with anger. Harriet slammed the brakes, and the truck skidded. "God damn," she muttered. "Hold on tight." She hit the gas, intending to barrel past him. But the man flicked a hand and the entire truck lurched to the side as though shoved by an invisible force. We crashed into the embankment, the windshield fracturing in a spiderweb pattern. Harriet groaned, banging her head on the steering wheel. I shielded Rufus from the worst of the impact. My side flared with agony. The man approached. Harriet tried to lift her shotgun, but the barrel bent in her hands as though made of clay. I saw her face go pale. He yanked the driver's side door off its hinges and tossed it behind him like an old toy. Harriet swung at him with her fists, but he grabbed her wrist and twisted. I heard a sickening crack. She screamed, eyes bulging in pain. "Stop!" I shouted, flinging open the passenger door. I stumbled out, holding the box of ashes. "This is about me, isn't it? Let her go." He turned those black eyes on me, his expression hungry. Harriet collapsed, cradling her shattered wrist. She moaned in agony. The man started coming around the hood, ignoring Harriet, ignoring Rufus. His gaze was pinned to me alone. "Yes," he said softly. "You are mine to claim. You and your brother's memory." I backed away, the box of ashes trembling in my grip. Thinking of Harriet's words, about how this might be fueling him, I made a split-second decision. Opening the box, I scattered the remaining ashes over the muddy road. As they blew away in the wind, I felt a searing pain in my chest, like part of me was being torn out, but the man hissed in fury, doubling over as if struck. His skin cracked along the edges of his perfect face, revealing something dark and raw underneath. He lunged anyway, voice echoing in a guttural snarl. "You can't!" I dived back into the truck, rummaging for anything I could use. My hand closed around Harriet's old emergency flare, bright orange casing battered but intact. As the man grabbed my shoulder, I twisted around and ignited the flare, shoving it into the wound in his midsection. Sparks and smoke erupted. He let out an unearthly shriek, staggering backward. The thick fluid gushed from the wound, sizzling in contact with the flare. Outside, Harriet mustered the last of her strength to grab a tire iron from the truck bed. With a grimace, she rammed it into the creature's back. I heard a wet crunch, followed by another hideous howl. He spun on her, eyes blazing. But he was weakening. His form flickered. In a surge of movement, he smashed Harriet across the face, sending her sprawling. Then he whirled to me, black blood dripping from his torso, fury twisting his features into an unrecognizable mask. I braced myself, certain I was done for, but a sudden movement by my feet. Rufus lunged from the cab, jaws clamping onto the man's ankle. The dog's teeth sank in deep. The man screeched, his illusions flickering. In that instant, I slammed the truck door onto his arm with all my might. There was a sickening snap. He collapsed to one knee, thrashing, pinned between the door and the frame. Harriet, battered and bloody, let out a savage yell and yanked the tire iron free, then smashed it down on his head again. Something tore in the air. The man convulsed violently, then collapsed. His body began dissolving into thick, black sludge, hissing. Harriet dragged herself away, panting. I stood there, half expecting him to rise again, but the sludge bubbled and seeped into the earth, leaving only a burned patch of grass. The wind around us died, and the sky looked different. The faint glow of dawn started to spread more naturally, the edges of the horizon shifting to pink and orange. My watch's second hand stopped spinning backward. It resumed ticking forward. Rufus limped to my side, exhaustion overwhelming him. I scooped him up as gently as I could. Harriet groaned, pointing to the slope. "Truck's busted. We've got to walk," I grimaced, glancing at the twisted frame of the pickup. The engine hissed steam, obviously no longer drivable. "I can help you," I said, though I was limping badly myself, my ankle throbbing, side bruised and heart racing. We limped away down the dirt road, Harriet leaning on my shoulder, me cradling Rufus. The forest had changed. The trees were fewer, more spaced out, and actual sunlight began filtering through. After maybe half an hour of slow progress, we stumbled onto a real paved road. Cracked and old, but a highway nonetheless. A battered sign by the shoulder read, "Welcome to Sassafras Mountain Scenic Byway." It looked a lot more normal now. Through sheer luck, or maybe it was fate, we flagged down a passing truck carrying a father and his teenage son. They were out fishing at a nearby lake, they said, and looked at us like we'd crawled out of hell. In a way, we had. They helped Harriet into the back seat and offered me room as well. Rufus settled on my lap, whimpering but alive. The father kept asking what happened, but Harriet shot me a look, silently begging me not to share the full story. I told them we'd had a bad run-in with a wild animal. The father nodded in sympathy and drove us to the nearest hospital. When we arrived, hospital staff whisked Harriet away for her broken wrist and battered face. A veterinarian was called for Rufus, who had deep puncture wounds on his leg and a probable fracture. I told the staff my name, explained that I'd gotten lost hiking. They seemed confused. Apparently, I'd been reported missing for over 2 months. That made no sense, but I didn't argue. I was just grateful to be out of those woods. Days later, Harriet disappeared from the hospital without checking out, leaving behind only a cryptic note on a napkin. "Burn it all or it'll take root again." I'm not sure what she meant. Sometimes I wonder if she returned to the mountain to stop whatever was left behind. As for me, I moved in with a friend back in Atlanta. My ankle needed time to heal. Rufus needed weeks of rest and a cast for his leg, but he recovered. Only sometimes he sits at the door late at night, staring at something outside, whimpering softly. I can't see whatever he's looking at, but I feel it. I sense that presence near the perimeter of my life, waiting for a weak moment. One morning, a package arrived at my new address, no return label. Inside was a tangle of vines shaped like the strange looped symbol I saw in the woods. I burned it in my sink, ignoring the putrid smoke. Since then, things have been quiet, but I've never truly felt safe. Every so often, my watch stops at 6:43 a.m. for no apparent reason, then resumes ticking again. I can't help but recall that burnt circle on the ground and wonder if part of the mountain's presence still clings to me. I keep thinking about Will's ashes. I never got to give him a proper scattering, but maybe it was enough to break that entity's hold on him, on me. I try to tell myself it's over, that I'm free. Yet, when night falls, sometimes I hear rustling in the hallway or the slow scrape of nails against the door. I'll check the clock, find that it's 6:43 a.m. Impossible in the middle of the night. My phone glitches or the lights flicker. I've spent hours online researching Sassafras Mountain. There are countless legends of missing hikers, lost time, supernatural sightings. People claim they see strange footprints, hearing voices, catching glimpses of barefoot figures in old suits. None of it's official, of course. The authorities chalk it up to misadventure or folks exaggerating ghost stories. But I know the truth. I lived it. I survived it. Sometimes I dream I'm back on that observation platform, the horizon split between day and night. The man in the suit stands behind me, whispering how I'll never really leave. I wake up in a cold sweat, running my hand along the faint scar on my wrist where he grabbed me. Rufus usually wakes with me, letting out a scared little bark at something unseen. I don't think it's ever truly over. I don't know what it means to be claimed by that presence, or if Harriet managed to chase it deeper into the shadows of that cursed mountain. But I do know this. If you go up Sassafras Mountain alone, especially if you carry grief or guilt or a heavy heart, you might see those footprints in the mud. You might hear your loved ones calling your name. You might see a figure in a charcoal suit, barefoot, with a grin too wide for any human face. And if you do, my advice is simple. Run. Because not everyone makes it out. And even if you do, you'll never leave the darkness behind. You'll carry it with you forever. I still do, and I suspect that one day it may come calling again. If it does, I just pray I'm strong enough to say no, to remember what Harriet said, burn it all, or it'll take root again. But for now, I live with the nightmares, and when the clock stops at 6:43 a.m., I hold my breath, waiting to hear the voice in the dark, waiting to hear my brother's laughter urging me back. My name is Thomas Weller. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in June of 2025 when I decided to leave behind my corporate life in Columbia, South Carolina, to escape into the wilderness with only my dog, Buck, by my side. I had never been a soldier or a woodsman, nor was I some ex-Special Forces survivalist. I was just a tired office worker, haunted by stress and dead-end monotony, who wanted to reset everything on Sassafras Mountain, the highest peak in my home state. I thought it would be quiet. I thought it would be healing. Instead, it nearly cost me my life. I remember the day we drove out there. My SUV was weighed down with gear I'd bought mostly online. A brand new, top-of-the-line sleeping bag, a durable all-weather tent, freeze-dried meals that promised nutrition if not flavor, and purifiers for the local water sources. I had a map printout, even though I planned to rely on my phone's GPS for the final approach, and about a month's worth of supplies. My plan was simple: spend the summer in isolation, journaling my experiences for a future memoir, and see if this experiment in solitude could give me direction. Buck, my loyal 7-year-old German Shepherd, was restless in the passenger seat. He wasn't used to traveling so far, but he seemed excited for a big new backyard to explore. Even as I pulled onto the winding roads leading to Sassafras Mountain, I was full of optimism. The first sign of trouble came right when the official roads turned to gravel. My phone's battery, which I'd charged at nearly 100% only a few hours ago, dropped into the red. I assumed it was just a glitch. Sometimes the phone's percentage misreads when it's running location services or if the temperature is too hot. But it was more than that. Within 5 minutes of pulling off the main road, the phone was dead. No final beep. No chance to save battery. It simply went black. My attempts to restart it failed. I wasn't happy about losing my main source of GPS navigation, but that's what my backup maps were for. I parked in a small gravel turnout near a faded sign that said, "Sassafras Summit, 4 miles." Buck hopped out eagerly, muzzle tilted up at the fresh mountain air. We were surrounded by dense forest. The last flickers of evening sunlight slid between tall pines, oaks, and maples. Thick undergrowth in every direction suggested that the official trail might be more of a suggestion. I shrugged off the mild concern, hoisted my overstuffed pack, and locked up the SUV. I wasn't planning on using the car much until late summer anyway. My goal was to find an old cabin I'd heard about, an abandoned firewatch station built decades ago, rumored to be near the summit. That was my intended home for the next few weeks. The first day's hike was unremarkable, although more difficult than I expected. The altitude climb felt like a punch to the lungs. My new boots rubbed blisters onto my heels, and under the canopy, daylight faded faster than it would in the open. By the time I found what looked like a long-neglected path marker, it was almost fully dark. With no phone flashlight, I relied on my standard headlamp. The gloom thickened quickly, and Buck started whining for no apparent reason. He'd stare off into the trees, hackles raised, lips quivering around a low growl, but I'd see nothing. Telling myself it was just wildlife, maybe deer or even black bears. I pitched a small tent in the clearing and set up for the night. That was when the trouble with the fire began. I had a lighter, dry kindling, even fire-starting gel, but every time the flames caught, they fizzled out in seconds. I'd done this enough in my backyard or on weekend camping trips that I knew how to get a fire going. Yet each attempt died almost immediately, leaving only a trail of smoke and a weird chemical smell I couldn't place. Eventually, I gave up and crawled into the tent, concluding I would eat a cold meal and try again in the morning. I slept fitfully. Sometime around midnight, I dreamed I heard a boy's voice whispering outside the tent. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was almost pleading. Half awake, half asleep, I thought I heard the rustle of leaves, as though someone were pacing. Buck, who typically would bark if anyone came near, was silent. No growls, no movement. I pressed my ear to the tent fabric, but heard nothing more. Eventually, exhaustion won out. When morning light filtered into the clearing, I found my tent unzipped from the inside, but I was certain I hadn't done that. I had also woken up with pine needles and soil clinging to my socks. Buck sniffed the edges of the tent and let out a low whimper. He rarely whined unless something was wrong. I shrugged it off, telling myself that I'd just absent-mindedly opened the tent in the night to pee, or that maybe Buck had pawed his way out. Still, it felt like a weird start. We continued up the mountain. The path was less defined as we went, but I'd spent hours studying my topographic map and had a compass. By late afternoon, we reached the old Firewatch station. It was in far worse shape than I expected. A ramshackle wooden cabin with half its roof caved in, broken windows, and graffiti scrawled on the outside. But it had 4 standing walls, and inside there was a rough stone fireplace that looked workable. The station was perched near the summit, offering a view over the forest below. If I didn't look too closely at the rotted sections of wood, it was actually charming. I busied myself clearing debris, patching holes, and setting up a new canvas tarp as a partial roof. Though it was dirty work, it felt good to do something with my hands. I was hauling out rotted old chairs when Buck let out a sudden bark. I turned to see him standing tense at the tree line. He refused to move from that spot, staring off into the shadows. At first, I saw nothing but trees. Then, a flicker of movement. A small figure stepping behind a trunk. A person? A child? I called out, "Hello?" No answer. Buck bared his teeth. I decided if it was some lost kid, I should probably go check. My dog followed behind, though he seemed uneasy. After 15 minutes of searching, I found no sign of anyone. Convinced it was either a trick of light or maybe a local kid messing around, I returned to the station. That evening, I attempted to make a fire in the fireplace. It took several tries, but eventually I got a small blaze going. Maybe it was just the indoor environment blocking the wind. I warmed up a freeze-dried dinner and, as night fell, took out my headlamp to explore around the station. Everywhere was still and quiet, except for the usual nighttime insects and an owl or two. Buck stuck close to me. Then came the sense of time warping. I had started a quick walk around the perimeter, planning to be gone maybe 20 minutes. The moon was bright enough through the trees that I felt comfortable leaving the station in darkness. But when I circled back to the front door, my watch read 3 in the morning. That meant I'd been gone for over 3 hours. My sense of passing minutes was all wrong, like I was stuck in a hazy mental fog. Even worse, the cabin was dark. The fireplace had burned itself out to cold ash, which shouldn't have happened so quickly. Buck stood on the threshold, panting heavily as though he'd run a mile. My head felt strangely light, like I'd inhaled a bunch of chemicals. I scolded myself for letting my nerves get to me. Perhaps I was just tired and lost track of time. We both retreated inside and I tried to sleep, but I didn't sleep well. At some point in the night, I heard a voice calling for help, muffled through the trees. It echoed, "Dad, Dad, are you there?" A boy's voice, desperate, wavering. My heart hammered. The next morning, I got up and did a thorough search of the surrounding forest, calling out, "Hello, where are you?" No response. Buck trotted behind me, stiff-legged, sniffing every corner of brush. But no sign of footprints or recent disturbance. When I got back to the station, I discovered my sleeping bag outside, dragged onto the dirt. It was unzipped fully, as if someone had rummaged through it. It had muddy handprints near the footbox, tiny handprints much smaller than mine. That day, I also discovered my water purifier was broken. The interior filter was cracked, though I couldn't guess how. I had a backup, but that was more of a short-term straw filter, not really meant for extended use. This was all unraveling faster than I expected. My phone, still dead, refused to even turn on. The solar charger I brought for it gave no life either. I was in complete off-grid mode now. On the 4th day, a morning fog rolled in thick. I kept close to the station but wanted to gather more wood from the surrounding area. Buck and I located some fallen branches and I stacked them near the entrance. That's when I saw a shape at the edge of the clearing. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, barefoot, wearing old-fashioned clothes. He stared right at me, expression blank, dark eyes unwavering. My blood turned cold. He didn't look like any local camper. His face was white, almost pallid, with a hint of bluish color around his lips. He didn't seem scared or shy. He seemed unnatural. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hey, buddy, you lost?" The boy said nothing for a moment. Then, in a voice far older than any child's, he said, "I'm just waiting for my daddy." Then he asked, "Can I stay with you until he comes back?" My mind raced. There was no chance I was leaving a kid alone on this mountain. So I said, "Of course. Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, not blinking once. Buck started whining, circling behind me. I noticed the hair on my arms was on end. I brought him into the station and tried to give him water from my canteen. He didn't drink. He just sat on the dusty wooden floor, knees pulled up to his chest, eyes staring at the empty fireplace. After a few minutes, I asked, "What's your name?" He responded in a soft monotone, "Eli?" I mustered a gentle smile. "Well, Eli, do you know how you got here?" He shook his head, stared down at his bare feet. He had no scrapes or dirt on them, even though the ground outside was covered in sharp twigs and stones. That night was the single most unnerving experience of my life up to that point. Eli remained motionless in the same spot, silent. I couldn't coax him to eat anything. Not a single bite of the freeze-dried meals nor the granola bars I offered. Occasionally, he'd ask, "When's my daddy coming?" I tried to be reassuring. "Maybe tomorrow we can look for him." Meanwhile, Buck refused to come near the boy, and I mean refused. He would hide at the far side of the station, ears pinned back, eyes wide with fear. When I got up to stoke the fire, the flames spat sparks, turning from orange to a weird blue-green hue, then died almost immediately despite the ample wood. It felt like the air itself inside the cabin was suffocating the flames. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Eli was standing up and walking around the station without a flashlight, and in the total darkness, I could see his form gliding across the floor. He didn't bump into anything, didn't appear to need light. I listened as he circled the cabin, barefoot footsteps almost soundless. Then he crouched down beside Buck. I heard a low growl from my dog, a sound so desperate that it frightened me. Eli whispered something. The language, if it even was language, sounded harsh and ancient, churning in the back of his throat. Buck let out a broken yelp, then fell silent. I jumped up, flipping on my headlamp to see what was happening, but Eli was standing near the door again, blinking at me with a flat expression. Buck was on his side, breathing fast, whining softly. I scooped Buck up, tried to figure out if he was injured. I found no cuts, no blood, but he was trembling uncontrollably. I demanded, "What did you do to him?" Eli's mouth twitched in a faint smile. No answer. I laid Buck down on my sleeping pad, wiped the foam from his muzzle, and tried to calm him. All the while, Eli returned to the center of the room and stood motionless. Eventually, the boy asked, "Why'd you come up here?" I tried to make conversation, stammering about needing solitude, wanting a fresh start. He nodded like he knew something I didn't. By morning, Buck seemed stable. Eli sat with his back against the wall, eyes open, as though he hadn't slept at all. When I approached him with a piece of dried fruit, I realized there was not a speck of dust on his clothing, and though the temperature had dropped, he never once shivered. I also noticed the odd bluish tint around his lips seemed more pronounced. He blinked seldomly, and each time his eyelids dragged as though forced. Unease coursed through me. I told him we'd start searching for his father, so I slung on my pack and tried to lead him outside. In the daylight, the forest around the station looked unchanged. Tall trees, thick brush, sloping ground leading toward the summit. But the moment we stepped beyond the clearing, the sense of distance warped. We'd walk for 10 minutes and see a rock formation or fallen log. Then, half an hour later, we'd see the exact same formation again, like we had looped in a circle without turning. I double-checked the compass, but its needle spun wildly. I pulled out my map, but none of the terrain matched. Eli didn't complain or show any confusion. He just walked behind me, silent. At one point, I decided to backtrack, using tree markings I'd made in the bark. Those markings led me right back to the station in what felt like 5 minutes, yet my watch indicated 2 hours had passed. My sense of time was completely unreliable. Buck, who normally trotted ahead on a hike, refused to leave my side. Every step we took, I caught him glancing warily at Eli, a low moan rumbling in his throat. I decided to return to the station once more. I couldn't risk wandering aimlessly with a child in tow, but to my confusion, Eli's presence felt less like a child and more like a gravitational pull, a black hole in the shape of a boy. That afternoon, an intense hunger gnawed at me. I realized I hadn't eaten much in the last few days. My appetite had vanished under the stress. I forced myself to open a freeze-dried meal, only to discover mold. Green, fuzzy mold crawling all over the sealed package. Thinking it was just a manufacturing error, I checked another. Same problem, then another. All my food had spoiled overnight. The only explanation I could conjure was that the vacuum seals had somehow broken, letting in moisture. But so quickly, on so many packages. Buck's dog food was also rancid. The smell made me gag. I felt panic swelling. I had no phone, no certain path down, and no food, and I was responsible for a child. I considered leaving him, but my conscience rebelled at that. An hour later, I noticed my entire backpack was gone. I tore the station apart looking for it, rummaging through corners, throwing aside crates and debris. It was simply gone. Then, near dusk, I stumbled upon it in the corner of the station I'd already searched. It was stuffed full of bones, small, pale bones that looked suspiciously human in shape. Ribs, vertebrae, a partial skull with wide eye sockets. I let out a choked scream. Eli stood behind me, quiet as a shadow. He said nothing, just gazed at me with those large dark eyes. Trembling, I emptied the bones onto the cabin floor. Were they real? They looked real. I had studied enough about anatomy to identify that they weren't from a deer or a small mammal. My stomach twisted in horror. No child should see something like that. But Eli didn't look disturbed. If anything, he looked pleased. That night, everything escalated to a waking nightmare. Buck was restless, pacing the edges of the station. Each time the dog approached Eli, he'd recoil, hackles raised. The fire refused to catch no matter what I tried. I felt the cold pressing in as though the walls let in a freezing wind. Yet the sky outside was mostly clear and calm. After hours of anxious waiting, I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. At some unknown hour, I jolted awake to the sound of Buck snarling and barking. Flickers of lightning-like light illuminated the cabin, but there was no storm. The air smelled of ozone and something sulfuric. Eli was standing, levitating might be more accurate, about an inch off the floor. Eyes black as obsidian, lips pulled back in a grin too wide for his face. Buck was lunging at him, snapping, and I was torn between fear for my dog and terror of the boy. Eli spoke in that guttural, ancient tongue, and Buck collapsed, convulsing violently. I screamed, scrambling to reach my dog. Eli angled his head, gazing at me with a look of curiosity more than anger. Buck coughed up thick, dark fluid. His fur peeled back in patches, revealing raw, reddened flesh that looked as though it was rotting before my eyes. I tried to hold him, pressing down on his flank, but he let out a pitiful whine and jerked away, his body in unstoppable spasm. I cursed, tears streaming, powerless. Finally, Buck went stiff, He took one last rattling breath, then lay completely still, eyes frozen open in terror. My best friend gone. I screamed at Eli, my voice cracking. Why? Why are you doing this? Eli lowered slowly to the floor. His grin remained. He tried to harm me, he said, in a voice that echoed with 1,000 undertones. No one hurts me. Then he added, as though scolding a naive child, This is my mountain. I lost all sense of reason. My vision blurred with tears. I raged, snatching a piece of broken wood, brandishing it like a club, wanting to crush that thing that looked like a boy. Eli didn't move, only watched, that grin never faltering. I swung. The improvised weapon struck air as he vanished, reappearing a foot away. My heart hammered, the adrenaline surging. But my knees threatened to buckle. I stumbled back toward the far wall, near Buck's corpse. That was the last moment of clarity I recall before blackness swallowed me. When I regained consciousness, dawn light was pouring through the missing section of the roof. My head pounded like I'd been hit with a rock. The floor reeked of death. My dog's body was still there, but it looked further decayed, like he'd been gone for weeks, not mere hours. Clumps of fur lay scattered, as if carried by a breeze. I wept at the sight, at the smell. Then I saw footprints leading away from the body, small, bare footprints heading out of the station. In a rage, in a desperate madness, I decided I had to end this. The fear was replaced by a numb sense of grim determination. I would kill Eli, demon, child, or whatever he was. I had a hunting knife among my gear. I rummaged, found the sheath, strapped it to my waist, then I stepped outside. It was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects. A thin mist curled through the trees. I followed the footprints for what felt like hours, though my watch was stuck, the second hand trembling in place. The forest twisted around me. Landmarks repeated. I saw a series of strange wooden statues, childlike carvings with contorted faces arranged in a half circle around an old oak. Then I'd walk another mile, only to find the same carvings again, as if I'd never left. I was about to lose hope when I emerged into a clearing. In the center stood the skeleton of a cabin. It looked ancient, partially burned. My stomach dropped when I realized it was the same Firewatch station, but from a different era. The paint was peeled off, the structure half caved in, yet it was in the exact position. It was as if I'd traveled in time and found the building decades after it was destroyed. But that made no sense. My original station was not burned, it was just old and neglected. Inside that ruin, I found objects nailed to the crumbling walls. Old Polaroid photos of a man in the 1950s. The man had a face eerily similar to mine. He was smiling, dressed in clothes that might have fit the era. Standing next to him in each photo was a barefoot boy with that same flat, unnatural smile. Eli. My heart almost stopped. The final photograph showed them both looking at the camera, each with the same dark eyes. The year scrawled beneath was 1956. That's when I heard a sound behind me, footsteps. Eli stepped over the threshold of the burned doorway, regarding me calmly. He didn't look ghostly or even inhuman now. He just looked like a pale boy, except for those bottomless eyes. I gripped my knife. "What the hell are you?" I demanded, voice trembling. He tilted his head. "I'm what's left," he said softly. "What's always been here." He advanced a step, and I slashed wildly. He moved faster than I could follow, one moment 3 feet away, the next behind me. I spun, the tip of my blade slicing air. Eli was gone again. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My mind reeled, the sense of time unraveling. The rotted walls flickered, half returning to the shape of the normal station, then back to charred timbers. The forest outside the windows was bright day, then twilight, then day again. My watch hand spun. Panic surged. I sank to my knees, gripping my knife with white-knuckled desperation. Somewhere in the swirling confusion, I heard a familiar bark. I turned to see Buck standing in the doorway. For a blissful second, hope flared. Maybe he wasn't really dead, but as I looked closer, I saw the hollowness in his eyes. He stood too rigidly, and the fur around his neck was missing, revealing putrid flesh. He sniffed the air, then turned his head to me, except it wasn't my Buck. He was wrong. When I called his name, he made no sign of recognition. Instead, he stared with that same black-eyed gaze as Eli. Then, in a rasping voice that should never come from a dog, he spoke. "You should have let me kill him." His mouth moved like a poorly controlled puppet, lips stretching in disturbing ways around each word. I stumbled backward, tears streaming, mind screaming that this was impossible. Buck, this thing wearing Buck's form, strode closer, stiff and unnatural. I lunged with my knife, refusing to see my beloved companion so desecrated. The blade cut into dead flesh. The dog staggered but didn't bleed. Instead, a black tar seeped out, dripping onto the floor with a sizzling hiss. The dog let out a grotesque yelp that shifted into a human-like shriek. Then Buck's body convulsed and fell, dissolving into more of that black sludge. I gagged, the stench like 1,000 rotting corpses. Eli's laughter echoed from somewhere I couldn't see, bouncing off the ruinous walls. I clutched my head, fear and disgust overwhelming me. Next thing I knew, I was lying in the grass outside the cabin, daylight bright overhead. The structure behind me intact and unburned, just as it had been when I first arrived. My watch told me it was early morning, though I couldn't trust it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was free of the nightmare, but my nose still caught the faint stench of rot, and every muscle in my body ached like I'd been in a fight. I decided, then and there, I had to escape this mountain at any cost. Abandon the supplies, let the station rot. I couldn't survive. Not with no food, no dog, no workable phone. Gathering what little strength I had, I sprinted downhill. I tried to find the route I'd come in on, but every turn seemed to lead me back to the same cursed clearing or the same winding path that circled back to the station. My mouth was parched. I was forced to drink from a small creek, ignoring the risk of parasites or contamination. At least I was too desperate to notice any foul taste. The water threatened to come back up immediately, but I forced it down. My mind spun with exhaustion, thirst, and grief. Then the trees parted in front of me, and I found a small ranger station, a squat building with a wraparound porch. Relief washed over me. I hoped to find a working radio or a vehicle, but as I approached, the windows looked dark and empty. "Hello?" I shouted. No answer. Inside, chairs and desks were covered in dust. On the wall, a calendar read 1998. The radio equipment was there, but everything was rusted, wires missing. I rummaged through the drawers. I found nothing of use but a single hunting knife more rusted than the one I already carried. A thick layer of grime clung to every surface, as though it had been abandoned for decades. I sank into a chair, head in my hands, feeling the weight of hopelessness. Was I doomed to wander this mountain forever, trapped by some impossible malevolent force? My entire body trembled with fear, rage, and sorrow. That's when I saw the door to a back storage room standing ajar. Inside, lying amid a pile of water-damaged papers, I found a scratched but functional canteen half full of clear liquid. I sniffed it, just water. My throat was so dry I choked on the first gulp. Satisfied it wasn't tainted, I decided to keep it. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch. My heart hammered. I ducked behind the desk. The footsteps were cautious, methodical. I peeked around the corner expecting Eli. Instead, it was a man wearing tattered jeans. his face half hidden by a ragged beard. He carried a shotgun. A real person. Relief warred with alarm. Before I could speak, he barked, "Who's in there?" I rose slowly, hands raised, tears of gratitude nearly spilling out. "Thank God," I rasped. "Please, I need help. My dog, this child, we're trapped." My words stumbled out in a desperate rush. The man's eyes were full of suspicion. He introduced himself as Roy, said he was a local who occasionally hunted these parts, though he avoided the summit. I babbled about everything that had happened. My phone dying, my dog's gruesome end, the boy who was no boy at all. Roy stared at me like I was insane. "You been drinking or on something?" he asked. I told him no. I asked if he'd seen a child wandering. He shook his head. "Folks sometimes talk about a ghost kid up in these mountains, but I always chalk that up to local legend. Never seen nothing like that myself." I saw a faint fear in Roy's eyes. He nodded at the door. "Come on, let's get out of here. My truck is half a mile downhill." That half mile became an impossible labyrinth. Roy marched confidently, certain of the route, but we never found his truck. The trees turned unfamiliar, the slopes changed abruptly. Roy cursed, said we must have gotten turned around. He checked his compass, needles swirling. I tried to explain that this was exactly what had happened to me. We circled back to the ranger station, only to find it was gone, replaced by dense forest. Roy's face paled. "No way," he muttered. "I swear we left it right there." That's when we heard a branch snap to our left. We both froze, hearts pounding. The boy stepped into sight, calm as ever, staring at Roy. The man lifted his shotgun. "Kid, you lost?" Roy asked warily. No response. I could see Roy's finger inch toward the trigger. I whispered, "Don't, he's not normal." But Roy, in panic or confusion, fired a warning shot into the air. The boom reverberated. The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he locked eyes with Roy. I saw Roy's expression shift from anger to horror. Then his lips parted in a silent scream as he pitched forward, clawing at his eyes. Blood trickled from the corners of them. I grabbed Roy's arm, trying to pull him back, but he began retching, black sludge pouring from his mouth. It was the same vile substance I'd seen come out of Buck. I watched helplessly as Roy collapsed, convulsing. The boy, Eli, still watched with that mild, cold curiosity. Then, Roy's shaking stopped. He lay still, eyes open, pupils fused into black orbs. Slowly, he lifted his head to look at me. "Thomas," he said, but it was Eli's voice. "It's good you brought me another one." Horror crashed over me as Roy's stiff body rose to its feet, puppet-like. It lurched forward, shotgun clattering to the ground. My survival instinct screamed at me to run. So I did. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, over logs, through thick brush that tore at my skin. I lost all sense of direction. The forest was darker than it should have been, night apparently falling in the span of minutes. I stumbled, nearly breaking an ankle on a root. My breath burned in my chest. Finally, I burst into a small clearing. The battered form of the original station stood at the center. No place else to hide. Inside, the stench of Buck's rotting body still clung to the air, though the corpse was nowhere to be seen now. I barricaded the door with a broken table, trembling from adrenaline and grief. I gripped my hunting knife, the only weapon left, and then, like a nightmare repeated, night gave way to day, as if a switch had flipped. Light streamed through the cracks in the roof. Time had no meaning. My mind was on the edge of breaking. Suddenly, the door creaked. The barricade slid aside with a scrape. Roy's body stood there, tilting its head at an unnatural angle, black eyes fixed on me. He, or it, didn't speak. It advanced, jerky, marionette-like. I backed up, brandishing the knife. The possessed Roy lunged. I slashed at him, the blade cutting deep into his arm, but no blood poured out. He grabbed me by the throat, choking with unimaginable strength. My vision blurred. I stabbed wildly in his side again and again. On the third or fourth stab, Roy's body emitted a high-pitched shriek that sounded nothing human. He stumbled backward, releasing me. I gasped for air. The blackness in Roy's eyes spread across his face like ink. Then the entire body collapsed, flesh crumbling away to reveal a skeletal frame that toppled to the floor in a heap of dust. Where his heart should have been, a black stain smoked faintly, then vanished. I dropped to my knees, sobbing, battered. I'd lost my dog. Now I'd witnessed a man used like a puppet and destroyed. I was alone, or so I thought. "That was impressive," came Eli's voice behind me, startlingly close. I spun to see him just a few feet away. How had I not heard him? He studied me with interest. "I've never seen one kill my vessel like that," he said, childlike yet dripping with malice. He took a step closer. I scrambled back, pressing my shoulders against the wall. The knife in my hand trembled, slick with Roy's remains. "Get away," I hissed. Eli smiled. "They always say that, but you wanted this. You came up here to find purpose, didn't you?" He advanced. My fear boiled into fury. I lunged, knife aimed at the center of that pale chest. Eli didn't dodge. The blade sank in, though it felt like I was cutting through thick clay. Instead of blood, a grayish ash seeped out around the blade. Eli's face contorted in pain, surprise, and then amusement. "You think that will do it," he whispered. Before I could pull the knife free, he grabbed my wrist. His small hand felt cold as death. My muscles locked, my mind screaming with agony as icy tendrils spread up my arm, into my chest. I felt something inside me twisting, an indescribable wave of darkness flooding my heart. Then, in a burst of desperate will, I yanked back, managing to wrench the knife out of him. I collapsed to the floor, hacking and coughing. Eli staggered, black eyes fluttering. The wound in his chest oozed more ash, and for the first time I thought I saw something like fear in him, or maybe rage. The station flickered again, the walls replaced by scorched timbers. The ground quaked. I used the moment of his weakness to scramble outside, diving through the open doorway, choking on sulfuric-smelling air. I ran, ignoring the stabbing pain in my lungs and the numbness in my arm. Branches whipped my face. Behind me, I heard an inhuman shriek that rattled the leaves. Reality blurred. Daylight flickered to dusk and back. I kept running, focusing on the one imperative, escape. Suddenly, the forest parted, and I was stumbling onto a lonely dirt road. Up ahead, I saw a pair of headlights. I nearly collapsed in relief. A search and rescue truck, battered and caked with mud, screeched to a halt. 2 men jumped out, wearing official patches. I tried to call out, but my voice was raw. I dropped to my knees in the middle of the road. They hurried over, shining flashlights in my eyes. I must have looked like a lunatic, blood, grime, tears streaking my face, clothes torn to rags. They asked me a flurry of questions, half of which I couldn't answer. All I could manage was, "I'm Thomas. Sassafras. Help." One man radioed in my location. The other cradled my head, gave me water. My vision swam with relief. They got me into the truck. I sobbed, half delirious, telling them about the cabin, the demon boy, my dead dog. They exchanged looks that told me they believed I was out of my mind. But they took me to a small rural hospital an hour away, pumping me with fluids, checking for injuries. At the hospital, I expected the police to show up, ask me about any missing persons or suspicious activity. Instead, I got sympathetic smiles and gentle coaxing to tell us your real name. I realized with dawning horror that no one believed me. Or maybe they believed I was Thomas, but not that I'd been up there for just a handful of days. A nurse confided quietly that I was found after being listed as a missing person for almost 4 years. My mind couldn't reconcile that. I had no memory of that length of time passing, no sense of how I could have survived. That same nurse also told me something else. A man named Roy had once gone missing on Sassafras Mountain back in 1993, never found. But apparently, I was babbling about a Roy with a shotgun. My story overlapped with old legends, old vanishings. The staff presumed I was deeply traumatized. My world turned into a blur of medical evaluations and psychological consultations. The official story: Thomas Weller disappeared in 2021 and was recovered in 2025, alive but delirious. I had no family left to claim me. My parents had both passed years ago, and I was an only child. The world had moved on. My old job, my apartment, all gone. While I was thankful to be alive, a nagging question burned in my mind. How had 4 years passed outside the mountain while I experienced only days? And the nightmares that plagued me left me certain I'd carried a piece of Eli's darkness with me. Sometimes at night, I sense him. I hear a whisper in the corner of my hospital room, or I glimpse a barefoot boy in the corridor. The doctors say it's PTSD, hallucinations from extreme stress and dehydration. But I know the truth. That entity still lingers, waiting. I dream of the station in flames, of that child's face smiling at me through the smoke. I have a scar on my forearm that never properly healed. And sometimes a cold numbness creeps along that arm, as if something is tunneling inside me. I wake up gasping for breath, sure that I'll see Buck's rotted face or Roy's possessed eyes. So that's the story I wish I could forget. My name is Thomas Weller. I'm 34, and in June of 2025 I set foot on Sassafras Mountain looking for a simpler life. I came back to a world that insists 4 whole years vanished. Maybe one day I'll gather the courage to return to that cursed peak and burn every inch of that station to ashes. But even then, I doubt it would matter. Some things are older than wood and stone, older than logic. I suspect Sassafras Mountain and the malevolent force that lives there will always be a part of me, no matter where I run. If you ever find yourself near those trails, and you see a small boy looking lost, do yourself a favor. Don't speak to him. Turn around. Walk away and don't look back. Because whatever that thing is, it already sees you, and you won't leave the mountain the same, if you leave it at all. My name is Matthew Harlan, and I'm 28 years old. This happened in August of 2023, out in the backwoods of Lake Jockasee, up near Devil's Fork State Park in Oconee County, South Carolina. I don't know if anybody who hears my story will believe it, but I have no reason to lie. Everything I experienced still haunts me, less like memories and more like glimpses of some fevered dream I can't shake. I've tried to piece the events together in a coherent line, but time didn't exactly work like it should out there. Days stretched, nights vanished, and reality broke in ways I can hardly put into words. Yet I'll try, because this is all I have left. I used to manage a retail store in Greenville. It's the kind of job you take when you have no special skills or ambitions left, but you still need to pay rent. Before that, I made half-hearted attempts at college. And before that, I worked at my father's auto shop. I lost him about 3 years ago during an awful December when the doctors said he had no more than a month to live. I ended up having to put down his old Rottweiler, Toby, right after the funeral because Toby was in terrible pain too. That was the tipping point for me. Somehow, putting down Dad's dog felt more personal than losing him. It was like a sign I wasn't allowed to keep anything. I fell into a heavy depression after that. I held on to life just enough to work, pay rent, eat junk food. Finally, this year I decided I had to do something radical or fall into an even darker hole. I bought an old secondhand tent, a backpack, and took my new dog, Coda, a 2-year-old German Shepherd mix, out to Lake Jocassee. She was supposed to be my emotional support, I guess. I'd rescued her from a shelter 6 months prior, and she saved me as much as I saved her. She's more loyal than I deserve. Devil's Fork. State Park had a good reputation. Scenic, clear water, decent fishing, and fewer crowds in late summer. I wanted solitude and quiet. I wanted to shut my phone notifications off, because the smell of that buzzing device gave me anxiety by now. People would call me for random chores, to pick up extra shifts or to pester me about aspects of my old life. Enough was enough. I entered the park the first weekend of August, planning for a 10-day stay. I'd mapped out a portion of the Bear Cove Trail that I'd read was a little off the typical routes, steeper, with some small backwoods sites you could claim if you were adventurous. I guess I wanted to test myself. See if I could handle being alone, living simply, tent, dog, campfire, and fresh air. The first day was perfect. I arrived in the morning, found a decent place to set up camp with a partial view of the water. The sun was bright, warm, and I felt an excited flutter in my chest, like I was doing the right thing for once. Coda was bounding around with more energy than I'd ever seen her have in the city. She was sniffing every inch of ground and wagging her tail so fast I thought she'd take flight. I pitched my small tent, set up a makeshift fire ring of stones, and tested my lighter on some tinder. Everything worked. My phone still had power, but I'd turned it off and left it in my backpack. I wasn't planning to check it unless there was an emergency. For water, I'd carried about 4 gallons, plus I had a purifier for the lake if I needed more. I had freeze-dried meals, granola bars, peanut butter, some jerky, a bag of dog food for Coda, and confidence that if I had to, I could fish. That first night I felt raw joy. The only strange thing was I heard what sounded like a child's laughter echoing across the water sometime after sundown. Maybe it was a family in a canoe or on a boat that was drifting near my side of the cove. I couldn't see any lights out there though, so I just shook it off. It didn't repeat, so I told myself I imagined it. The next day, mid-morning, I got the surprise of my life. I unzipped the tent to find my old friend Ethan Larrabee squatting beside the remnants of my campfire. He wore jeans with a big hole in the knee and carried a small backpack. He was fiddling with a can of cheap beer in his left hand. "Surprise," he said, grinning. "Figured I'd drop by." I hadn't spoken to Ethan in at least a year, maybe more. We'd been friends in high school, best friends for a while, but drifted after I became a depressed recluse. "What the hell?" I said, still on my knees halfway out of the tent. "How'd you find me out here?" Your car was at the trailhead. I recognized it. So I guess I just guessed the route you took?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal. But we'd never been here together, and the Bear Cove Trail is not some easy guess. I walked over, letting Coda sniff him. She let out a quiet, uncertain whine. Ethan ruffled her ears, but she stood stiff, no tail wag, which was odd. That dog was typically a fan of every new friend. "Anyway," he continued, "I've got a few days off. Thought I'd come keep you company." "Dude, sure, that's great, but wow, you must have woken up pretty early to track me here." He grinned again, eyes a bit too wide. "Yeah, too early. But no worries, man. We can just chill, catch up." I was a little uneasy. My old friend had just shown up unannounced in the middle of nowhere during my solo retreat. Yet part of me was also relieved. After all, I was still pretty new to solo camping. I liked Ethan once. I liked him a lot, actually. He used to be the more carefree one, always bringing the party while I was shy and anxious. If anyone could get me out of my shell, it was Ethan. So, we spent the afternoon fishing from the shore, telling old stories about high school. If I recall correctly, nothing felt truly off that whole day, except Coda continuing to growl at him randomly. She'd be wagging her tail one moment, and the next she'd bare her teeth like she'd recognized a smell on him that she didn't like. He tried to pet her again, but she kept ducking away. That night, Ethan insisted we have a fire and share a few beers. I wasn't in a drinking mood, but I sipped half a can just to be social. He drained 3 or 4. The conversation meandered from old crushes in high school to job woes in Greenville. He mentioned he was living in Spartanburg now, working construction. At one point he said, "Coda, huh? Toby was your dad's dog, right?" I blinked. I'd never talked to him about Toby or about my dad's dog. I was sure of it. Toby had only come up after my father died, and by that point, Ethan and I were hardly speaking. I chalked it up to him hearing about it from someone else, but the way he asked, so casually, gave me a chill. She was well into her second night of sleeping by my tent when she let out a small snarl. Ethan smirked at me and said, "I guess she's still not housebroken, huh?" The words felt off. Coda was definitely housebroken. She never had accidents at home, and Ethan knew absolutely nothing about her training. It felt like he was using a script, trying to speak about something he had no clue about. I decided to brush it off. I was maybe just reading into things. The next morning, I woke up early. Maybe it was around 5 a.m. I was going to start a fire to boil water for coffee, but Ethan was already up, pacing near the water. He stared across Lake Jocassee into the morning fog. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot and ringed with the dark circles. "You doing okay?" I asked, letting Coda wander to sniff around the campsite. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Thought I heard some crying, like kids." I nodded slowly. "I heard that the first night too. It's weird." He turned to me, mouth parting a fraction of an inch like he was going to say more, but then he shrugged. "Maybe we should check around. Could be someone who got lost." That sounded logical enough, so I quietly packed some snacks, water, the map I'd brought, a flashlight, and we started a short hike, keeping Coda leashed. The map was from the general store at the park entrance. I'd seen it a dozen times already, but that morning, when I pulled it out, the lines looked off. I thought it was just the dim early light, but as we walked, it seemed impossible to match the footpaths around us to the lines on paper. The land wasn't matching the topography. After about 15 minutes, I was sure we should have looped back toward the main trail, but we just kept going deeper. There was a sudden thickness in the air, a heavier humidity that turned into a slight shimmering. The trees overhead grew denser, and I swore we were hearing the lake water still to our left, though the map suggested we should be moving away from it. Ethan said nothing, but I noticed him glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. Finally, we decided we must have misread the map, so we tried to double back. But we ended up returning to a distinctive old rotten log that Coda had sniffed earlier. A log that should have been on the other side of the campsite. It was like the trail had looped on itself. We tried a different heading with the compass. We ended up at the same log. We repeated that fiasco for nearly 3 hours until the sun was fully up and the fog had burned away. It took us that long to find my campsite again, even though it should have been just a short walk. By the time we got back, Ethan was sweaty and my heart was racing with frustration. We decided to build a fire and eat something. That's when the fire refused to stay lit. I stacked tinder, small twigs, used a flame from my lighter, and it ignited, then fizzled out. I checked the dryness of the wood. It was bone dry. There was no breeze either, but it still refused. Ethan eventually doused some of his leftover beer on it. half joking, and that was enough to get a small flame going. But the flame that popped up was blue. Not that crisp orange we're used to. It burned blue for a minute or two, then settled into a normal color. By that point, I was deeply unsettled. The final straw that morning was pulling out my phone to check if maybe the GPS could sort out this nonsense. I'd left it off to save battery, so it should have been at nearly a full charge. But when I pressed the power button, it showed 2% battery, flickered, and died. Ethan tried his phone. Same issue. He insisted it was working fine last night, but now it wouldn't power on. Neither of us had a functioning phone. My old radio was in the car, but that was a miles-long hike. The result was, we were stuck, apparently disoriented with no means to contact help. By noon, we agreed the best approach was to systematically retrace the route we took from the car to the site, but that took us hours, only to find the path looping again. We grew more exhausted. Eventually, we had to stop and rest. My ankles ached. Coda was panting heavily. When we got back to camp again, the sun was going down. We'd accomplished nothing except a confusion. I tried to feed Coda, but she just paced around, whining and nudging my leg. She was anxious, too. I fed her by hand, which calmed her a bit. Ethan was sullen, said maybe we should get some sleep and try at first light. That night was worse. I woke up freezing in my tent. The sleeping bag was wide open, unzippered from the inside as though I'd undone it. But I had no memory of doing that. My hands were clammy and my heart pounded. I leaned out of the tent. The campfire was out, or at least no longer giving off light. The embers glowed faintly, a deep purple color. Coda barked off in the darkness. I called her name softly. She barked again, frantically, then yelped. A high-pitched echo shot up my spine. I crawled out, barefoot, panic tangling in my gut. Ethan was gone. His sleeping bag lay open and empty. I found a flashlight in my pack and shone it around. Past the trees, at the edge of the water, I caught sight of a figure. It looked like Ethan, holding an armful of twigs or branches. His head was tilted at an odd angle. Another shape, Coda, darted around him. Then the figure turned away, heading behind some thick bushes, out of sight. I jogged that direction, stumbling over the uneven ground. The flashlight beam bounced erratically. As I approached, I smelled something sweet and rotten. I nearly retched. The wet squelch of my footsteps made me realize the ground was saturated with water or slime. Then the smell was gone, as if it had never existed. I found Ethan kneeling with a stack of branches in his arms. He didn't look up, just stared at the wood. He set them down, stood, turned to me and smiled. But it was the kind of too wide smile you see in a bad dream. His lips almost curled to his ears and his eyes were blank. "Where's Coda?" I asked. He blinked once, so slowly that I thought maybe he was mocking me. Then, with that same inhuman slowness, he tilted his head. "She's gone," he replied softly. "Ran off." "What do you mean, ran off?" I heard her yelp. He shrugged, a jerky, spasmodic motion. "Maybe she caught a scent." "Caught a scent of what?" He opened his mouth a fraction and shut it, as though he were repeating the motion of speaking without sound. Then, in a watery voice, he said, "Fish." My skin broke out in goosebumps. It was a bizarre, nonsensical answer. "Ethan, are you okay?" I said, stepping closer. He pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes drilling into me, and made a slow, quiet hiss. The entire gesture felt performed, like an imitation. Something about him was fundamentally wrong. I heard movement behind me and turned, shining the flashlight. There was nothing there, but a faint giggle, like a child's laugh, drifted through the trees. When I turned back, Ethan was standing inches from my face, smiling again. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "You gave your name to the woods," he said, You gave it away." I swallowed hard, gave my, "What are you talking about?" He smiled again, that hideous grin. "You said it. You said it out loud. You said, 'My name is Matthew. I'm here to—' I heard you." I felt a shiver run up my arms. I had this memory. On the first day, I spoke out loud to the trees, telling them I was here to heal, that my name was Matthew Harlan. I told them everything. Kind of a weird practice to let out my old burdens. "That's not normal," I whispered, because I didn't know what else to say. Ethan laughed, but it came out like a cough. He hunched forward, spat something that glistened in the flashlight beam. A thick, wet clump of fur and teeth. I recognized it immediately. It was dog hair, and among the black lumps a sliver of pink tongue. I thought I saw the shape of a small canine tooth. My mind reeled. "Where is Coda?" I shrieked, voice cracking. He stepped forward. "She's with me," he said. I was so horrified I backed away, then turned and sprinted back to the campsite. I wanted to wake up, to find it all some twisted nightmare. When I reached the camp, I grabbed the largest branch from the fire ring. The embers made it too hot to hold near the end, so I gripped it halfway, ignoring the warmth. I turned to see if Ethan had followed. He hadn't. My eyes darted around, searching for Coda. No sign of her. My mind drifted to Toby, my father's dog, remembering the day I euthanized him. It was a mercy, but I'd never forgiven myself. The idea that I'd lost Coda the same way, violently, in the middle of these cursed woods, was impossible to stomach. I forced myself to do a perimeter search. I circled the camp with the flashlight, stepping slowly. The ground was spongy in places. Something like static electricity seemed to hum in the air. I saw footprints, human footprints, and near them I saw dog prints that ended abruptly, as though Coda had vanished mid-step. No matter how often I called her name, I got no reply, no sound, only my echo bouncing back from the watery cove. Finally, exhaustion took me. I collapsed onto a log, my heart beating so hard it throbbed in my ears. I stared at the sky. The stars looked distorted, as if I were looking at them through water. They spun in bizarre patterns. Eventually, I drifted off. I'm not sure how long I slept. I woke to a faint light of dawn. My watch said 6:15 a.m., but the sunlight was off. Instead of soft pink, it was harsh, bright, overhead. The forest was too quiet, no morning birds, no wind. I found Ethan at the edge of the camp again, crouched near the embers of the fire. He was bare-chested now, clothes folded neatly beside him. There were scratch marks on his chest, long and deep, like claw marks, but with no blood. He stood up slowly as I approached and gave me another uncomfortably wide grin. "Hello, friend," he said, in a voice too high-pitched, almost a whine. My eyes darted to the pile of clothes. "Where's Coda?" I asked. "She's gone." "Gone where?" He blinked and stared, no answer. I scanned for any sign of her, nothing. My mind was near a breaking point. I wanted to run, but running where? We'd tried to leave and the trails looped back. Our phones were dead. The map made no sense. "All right," I said, swallowing panic. "We're leaving, Ethan, both of us. Maybe we can find a ranger station if we cut across the ridge." He looked me in the eye, that watery, unnatural gaze, and said, "I can show you the way." He started walking, so I followed him, more out of desperation than trust. He led me uphill, up a rocky slope covered in roots. It was steep, and with each step I felt the muscles in my legs burn, but I kept going, hoping that maybe we'd break out of the loop. An hour later, we emerged into a clearing. In the center stood an old, twisted tree with massive cypress-like roots. The trunk was wide enough that 3 people holding hands might not circle it. Its bark was gray and covered in what looked like etched symbols, or even faces. Crude shapes that might have been carved ages ago. Coda wasn't there, but the stench of decay hung thick in the air. I almost retched again. Ethan walked up to the tree and placed a hand on the trunk. "It has so many names," he said softly. "So do you." I stared at him. "What is it?" He made a choking sound. It took me a moment to realize he was laughing. Then he jerked his hand away. A trail of some dark, oily substance clung to his palm. "Stop!" I yelled. "Stop messing around. Where's my dog?" He turned to me, eyes narrowing with something like pity. "It's over now," he whispered. Then he glanced upward toward the gnarled branches. I followed his gaze and saw pieces. Bones, I realized, curved and broken. There was the unmistakable shape of a dog's rib cage, spattered with dried blood, hooking over the thickest branch. I felt my entire mind tear in half. That was Coda. There was no question. I recognized the pattern in the fur that remained. Her muzzle, the shape of her head, just twisted open like a butchered animal. The grief hit me like a punch in the stomach. I staggered, tears burning my eyes. I fell to my knees, the world tilting in my vision. "Who did this?" I screamed, half sobbing. Ethan's smile broadened. A ripple passed under his skin as if something inside him was shifting. "She needed to feed the hollow," he said, or the thing that wore his shape said. Then he took a step forward. Rage and horror coalesced in me. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling forward with fists clenched. Ethan made no move to dodge. My punch landed square in his face. He flew backward, landing with a sick crunch. But then his laughter spilled out again, that choking noise. He rolled onto his belly, rising to his knees. Blood trickled from his nose. No, not blood, something black. And then he spat out a small chunk of fur. I lunged, swinging wildly, tears streaming down my face. I struck him 3 or 4 times, each blow accompanied by a jarring sensation in my fists, each blow matched by that inhuman laughter. My arms were screaming with pain, but I couldn't stop. It wasn't enough. Ethan coughed again, sputtering that black fluid. He hissed, "You gave your name away, don't you see?" I seized a large, fallen branch from the base of the tree, ignoring the sharp bark that bit into my palm. I smashed the side of his skull with it. I wanted him to die for what he'd done. Instead, the skin around his temple tore open like split fruit, revealing ropey muscle beneath, but no bone. Inside his skull was only red pulsating matter. That spurred me to strike again, shrieking in shock and fury. The second blow peeled a flap of his scalp back, exposing more of that meat. The third blow cracked what seemed like a faint, cartilage-like shell. He collapsed to the ground, face in the dirt, body twitching. A wet, choking rattle erupted from his open mouth. I gagged, stepping back, panting. My entire body trembled with adrenaline. I could not believe what I was seeing. Then I saw movement in the tree above me. Something else, or someone, was watching from the branches. I jerked the branch up, brandishing it like a spear, heart pounding. The shape moved deeper into the canopy, vanishing from sight. Finally, I dared look back at what was left of Ethan. He was convulsing slowly, the black fluid pooling under him. Despite the ruin of his head, he was still alive. He started pushing himself up with unnatural stiffness in his arms, as if he had no sense of pain or bone structure. "No," I breathed, not wanting him to stand, not wanting to see his face. He turned his head. Where half his scalp had been torn away, I could see bare muscle writhing in pulses. His left eye was gone, or maybe it had melted. "That's just a borrowed shape," a voice whispered. I looked around, seeing no one. Yet it was definitely a voice in the clearing. I realized, with dawning horror, that the voice was mine, my own voice, echoed from the trunk of the monstrous tree. "You gave me your name," it said. "So many lost hearts in these woods, but you gave it to me so willingly." I started shaking, stumbling backward. I had a sudden memory. In my first hour at the campsite, I'd stood by the water, saying out loud that I was there to heal my soul, that my name was Matt, and I was letting go of my old life. It must have heard me. Ethan's body lurched, then toppled. Something seemed to tear out from his back, a shape half lost in the gore. I couldn't look for more than a second. I turned and ran. I had no direction in mind except away. I scrambled back down the slope, practically tumbling in places. I tripped on a root and tumbled head over heels, bashing my knee against a rock. Pain flared, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the sun was still overhead, but it was too high, too bright. My watch said 4 p.m. The angle of the light suggested midday, or maybe late morning, but it sure as hell didn't look like 4 in the afternoon. Sweat dripped down my face. My leg throbbed in agony. I forced myself up, leaning on a thick branch for balance. I limped forward, ignoring the sense of the forest spinning around me. As I went, I noticed my backpack lying near a small cove. This was the same cove I'd camped beside, but everything looked older, more decayed, like days or weeks had passed. My tent was shredded, the poles snapped. The ground was littered with rotting food packages. My entire supply cache smelled rancid. I looked around in a daze. Had weeks passed? That made no sense. My watch still read the same day. My phone was nowhere in sight, but it was probably dead anyway. I rummaged through the backpack. The edges of the pack's fabric were frayed, like it had been left out in the elements for a long time. The dried meals inside were moldy, reduced to lumps of green. The water bottles had black algae swirling in them. I stumbled to the lakeshore in desperation. I cupped water in my hands. It smelled metallic. I saw dead fish floating near the surface, slick with a thin film of algae. A tremor of panic coursed through me. I was so hungry, but my mind reeled at the idea of eating anything from this cursed place. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it pressed on my chest. I hobbled back toward where I thought the main trail might be, but everything was different, as if the forest had changed overnight. Trees shifted. Logs that I recognized were missing. Or maybe it was me losing sense of direction. Then I heard a rasping call. "Matt, come see. You have to see this." It was Ethan's voice, or a close imitation. My heart hammered. I quickened my limp, trying to get away from that voice, but it followed me. On a whim, I checked my compass. The needle spun in circles. I began to fear I was in some dimension outside normal reality, trapped in an endless loop. My mind started turning traitorous thoughts. You could just lie down, close your eyes, and never get up. Maybe I had died already. Maybe I was in hell. Then I thought of Coda. The memory of her sweet face, her wagging tail, how she'd cuddle against me at home. I pictured her body, ripped and torn on the tree. Tears blurred my vision. I couldn't bear the idea that her last moments were in agony, that I hadn't protected her. My legs wobbled, nearly giving out. Somewhere behind me, I heard that watery laughter. Focus on something else, I told myself. Keep going. Don't let it catch you. I pressed forward for hours, or so it felt, though the sun never changed position overhead. It stayed bright, glaring, as though stuck in midday. My watch's hands jerked sporadically, jumping minutes at random intervals, sometimes reversing. Eventually, I reached a small cave near a ridge. The mouth wasn't tall. I had to crouch. Inside, the walls were slick with moisture. If I found fresh water, maybe I could survive a bit longer. I turned on my flashlight, thankfully it still worked, and ventured in. The walls were carved with faces, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Roughly chiseled from the rock, each depicted a wide, too-long smile. Some had deep gouged eyes, others had no eyes at all. Some were half-formed, as if a sculptor had lost interest part-way. The air smelled of stale earth, with a hint of that same decaying sweetness. Near the far wall, I saw my own face carved. The detail was uncanny. The parted lips, the shape of my nose, even the small scar on my eyebrow from a childhood biking accident. An insane laughter bubbled out of me. My reflection was literally in stone. I realized the face was brand new, fresh dust still lay at its base. I dropped to my knees, wanting to scream. I heard faint drops of water deeper in the cave. My thirst overcame my terror, so I pressed further, hoping for a small underground stream. What I found was a shallow pool. It wasn't moving, so it likely wasn't fresh. But desperate times. I kneeled, shining my flashlight into the water. It was murky, but mostly clear. I took a small sip, ignoring the bitterness. I gagged, but forced myself to drink more. As I leaned forward for another mouthful, I caught a reflection in the beam of light. Ethan, standing behind me, or what was left of him. His face was half caved in, the left side of his skull a raw mass of muscle, but he wore that wide grin. He was completely naked, though swirling black fluid covered much of his torso. I tried to jerk around, but he grabbed me by the hair and slammed my face into the pool. Water flooded my nose. I inhaled, choking. My arms flailed, and I managed to elbow him in the ribs, or where ribs should be. The impact was soft, like jabbing clay. He loosened his grip, just enough for me to free my mouth from the water's surface. Then he hissed into my ear, "I want your name. Give it to me. Give it back." "Get off," I screamed, lashing out behind me. My elbow struck something that cracked. He howled, releasing my head. I twisted, gasping, and saw him staggering, holding the left side of his chest as black fluid oozed out. I took my chance. I lunged forward with the flashlight, jamming the tip into his open wound near the collarbone. The wet, sick squish under my hand made me want to vomit, but I forced it in deeper, twisted. Ethan's face contorted, or maybe the muscle that remained contorted. He gave a warbling howl that echoed in the cave. I pulled free, stumbling away, nearly falling back into the pool. With one last glance at that abomination, I scrambled out of the cave, my knee throbbing, lungs burning. I heard him scrabble after me, footsteps slapping the moist cave floor. But once I hit daylight, I found no sign of him. I couldn't handle going any farther. My entire body was in agony. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I collapsed near the cave mouth, leaning against a boulder. The forest was quiet now, unearthly still. At some point, I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, a soft twilight had finally settled over the woods. My watch read 7:12 p.m. I almost laughed with relief to see the day had changed. And then I realized the forest had changed too. The thick canopy was more open, revealing swaths of sky. Rocks around me were in different positions, as if the topography had rearranged while I slept. My thirst and hunger raged, but fear of that monstrous lake water or rotting supplies paralyzed me. I forced myself to stand, leaning heavily on a thick branch. I made a vow, I'm going to find my car. I started walking, trying to recall how I'd first arrived. I realized that Ethan and I had come from the north, or so I'd thought. Now, the compass was worthless. The stars overhead were no help either. They seemed to swirl if I looked at them too long. Still, I marched in the direction that felt like it sloped downward, because I recalled that the parking lot was downhill from the campsite. I repeated to myself, downhill means eventually I'll hit a road or a creek that leads to a main route. An hour passed, or maybe several. I encountered no animals, No insects, not even a rustle of leaves. It was as though every living thing had fled, leaving me alone with the presence that lurked behind every crooked trunk. At one point, I saw a faint flicker of orange light through the trees. My heart soared. A fire, maybe a rescue team, or some other campers who hadn't been caught in the loop. I staggered toward it, ignoring the pain in my knee. I stumbled into another campsite. The gear was half burned, the tents scorched. A large ring of blackened earth marked where a bonfire must have raged out of control. I realized with growing dread that it was my campsite. The shape of the tent, the leftover jacket by the bushes, those were my things. It had all been torched. The ring of ash still crackled faintly, as if it had only just burned. I crouched, touching one of the tent poles. It was hot, curling up from the melted nylon. I scanned for Ethan but saw no sign of him. The dog's remains weren't anywhere near, thank God, though I suspected maybe the twisted tree on the hill still held them. Exhaustion sank into me. My vision blurred. I picked through the wreckage, hoping for some salvageable morsel. I found a half-melted plastic container of peanut butter, which I devoured, not caring about the chemical tang from the molten plastic. I gagged it down, tears rolling. Near the remains of my shredded backpack, I spotted my keys. I seized them, heart jolting. If I could just find my car, I could drive out of this nightmare. That was reason enough to push on. The next hours passed in a haze. The moon rose overhead, but it looked too large, tinted red at the edges. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind me, or that childlike giggle echoing from the undergrowth, but nothing confronted me directly. Finally, I glimpsed the metal glint of a vehicle through the brush. My breath caught. I moved carefully, half expecting the forest to shift again, but it stayed. I parted the branches to see my car parked by a broken tree limb. Relief overcame me so hard I nearly fainted. I limped forward, pressed the unlock button on the key fob. No response. I tried again, nothing. Maybe the battery was dead, but the driver's side door was open anyway. I slid in behind the wheel, inserted the key in the ignition. I tried it, no response. Not even the faintest turn of the engine. I stared in disbelief. A scraping noise echoed from behind the car. I froze. Then I forced myself to pop the hood release and got out, hobbling around to look at the engine. What I found was horrifying. The engine block was caked in a black sludge, wires pulled out or bitten through. Some of the hoses were missing entirely. "This can't be happening," I whispered. But it was. I slammed the hood, adrenaline flaring. Maybe if I could just cross the seat wires or… No, that was insane. The engine was destroyed. Creaking steps on the gravel. I spun around to see a dark shape in the night. It was hunched, almost crawling. Then it rose up. A contorted silhouette that might have been Ethan's. I stepped back, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst. The shape came closer, into the faint moonlight. It was definitely Ethan's form, but the scalp was gone, half the skin peeled from his face. One arm dangled, useless, but he still moved with predatory intent. I fumbled for a weapon, found only a tire iron from the trunk. I brandished it, breathing in gasps. He, or it, made a sound that was half snarl, half guttural moan. Then it lurched forward. I swung. The tire iron cracked into its shoulder. It didn't even slow down. He lunged at me, bony hand swiping at my chest. I staggered sideways, hooking the iron under his ribs. He coughed out that black fluid again, splashing it across my legs. The stench was sulfuric. I almost lost my balance. He hissed, "Give me your name, your name." I wrenched the iron free, then brought it down on his spine. He collapsed onto the gravel with a meaty thud, still squirming. Rage and terror fueled me now. I struck again and again, smashing his back, hearing wet cracks as cartilage or bone snapped. Then I kicked him over to see if he was done. His chest was caved in, the flesh turned to a pulsing black mass, his head lolled backward, face locked in that grin. Somehow he still twitched. The grin parted, that watery voice emerging. "You see us now. We are many." I roared, raising the tire iron. Just before I brought it down on his skull, I saw movement in the tree line. More shapes, identical to Ethan, stepping forward. They all wore that grin. They were different heights, some half-formed. One had what looked like Koda's face fused to its chest, staring with dead eyes. Madness overcame me. I delivered the final blow to the Ethan on the ground, cracking his skull wide open. He finally went limp. Then I turned to the duplicates. There had to be 6 or 7 of them. I froze, hopeless. No way could I fight them all. Then, from behind them, I saw more shapes. So many, merging from the darkness. They were illusions, or real, or something in between. Some were missing limbs, others had elongated arms or multiple heads. I realized I was cornered. The tire iron felt pathetically small. My mind reeled. Then I remembered. The car. Maybe I could hotwire it or do something to get it rolling downhill, sludge or no sludge. I darted for the driver's door, ignoring the frantic throbbing in my knee. The shapes hissed. A few advanced, lurching in a broken gate. I slid in behind the wheel. The key was still in the ignition. Desperate, I turned it. The engine coughed, it coughed again. Then, somehow, unbelievably, it started. I had no time to question it. I slammed the door. One of the shapes smashed a fist into the window, cracking the glass. Another shape reached for the handle. I stomped the gas. The car lurched forward, and we shot onto a narrow dirt path. The engine rattled, the check engine light blaring. Steam hissed from under the hood, but it kept going, headlights illuminating twisted trees. The shapes shrank in the rearview mirror left behind. I gripped the wheel, leaning forward like a man possessed. If the road looped, I'd keep driving until sunrise, or until I found a break. We sped on for what felt like an hour, the tires bouncing on ruts, the suspension creaking dangerously. I nearly veered off a few times, but at last the path emptied onto what looked like a paved highway. The sign read, Scenic Highway 11. Relief crashed over me. I recognized it. If I stayed on 11 going east, I would eventually come back to civilization. I let out a ragged breath, tears of gratitude streaming down my cheeks. Koda was gone, but if I at least survived, maybe I could warn someone. The engine rattled again, losing power. We slowed, steam pouring from the hood. I let the car coast to the shoulder, pressing the hazards button, though I doubted they'd work. By the time I stopped, the engine died with a final hiss. Silence. Then the faint chirping of insects. I realized how quiet the forest near Lake Jocassee had been. The normal night sounds of crickets and frogs felt soothing now. I tried to open the door, but the handle stuck. I slammed my shoulder into it and it popped open. I half fell out, landing on the asphalt. Lights in the distance made me think of a car. I struggled to stand, waving my arms. A red pickup truck slowed, then pulled over. The driver was a middle-aged man with a kind face, though obviously alarmed at my bloody, ragged appearance. I practically collapsed in front of him, babbling about what had happened, about Lake Jocassee, about the monstrous shapes. He dialed 911. I must have passed out. The next thing I recall is waking up in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm, a nurse leaning over me with concern. They found me not far from the park entrance, apparently battered and delirious. I asked if they'd found Ethan or Koda. The nurse said, "The rangers searched, but the area's big, no sign of your friend or your dog." They talked about how I'd been out there 2 days according to the timeline I'd given them, though it felt like I'd spent a week or more. No mention of rotting gear or burned tents. They suspected dehydration and hallucination. I was borderline insane with grief. I told them about Koda's remains, about the unnatural illusions. A doctor suggested I might have eaten toxic berries or inhaled some hallucinogenic spores. The official line, I guess, but I know what I saw. I spent 2 nights in that hospital. The police took my statement. They asked if I had any reason to lie or if Ethan was a real person. I gave them what details I could, but they found no record of him in the Spartanburg database. They kept asking if maybe I'd just made up an imaginary friend. I had an old photo of us from high school, but it was too vague to provide definitive ID. After I was discharged, I drove back up to the Bear Cove Trail with a few rangers. We found no trace of my campsite, no signs of a fire, no cypress tree with carved faces. The ranger told me I was likely the victim of exhaustion, dehydration, and confusion. My car was found partially wrecked, but with normal engine trouble that might explain the steam. No black sludge in the engine. I felt my mind unravel. I insisted they keep looking. I told them about the twisted tree. The rangers found nothing. The next day, I returned alone. Foolish, maybe. I had to see for myself. This time, the path was exactly like the map said. It led to the spot I'd first camped, but there was no sign I'd ever pitched a tent there. No burned area, no rotting supplies, no smell of decay. The forest was normal. I couldn't stop crying, calling out for Koda. I hiked around for hours. At some point, I found a small patch of disturbed earth, but nothing more. The sun set, and the woods remained just ordinary trees. I eventually gave up, got home, tried to resume something like a life. The nightmares still come almost nightly. Sometimes I dream of seeing Koda alive in the distance, wagging her tail, only for her to vanish behind a tree. Other times, I see Ethan's face, half peeled away, telling me in a watery voice that I gave my name to the forest. People ask me about my scars, why my knee doesn't bend all the way anymore, why I have that haunted look. I tell them it was an accident up at Jockasee, a bad fall. Nobody hears the rest. They wouldn't believe me anyway. But here's what truly keeps me up at night. After they found me, the paramedics pulled something from my mouth. The nurse tried to explain it away as bark or leaves I must have chewed in delirium. But I swear it was Koda's dog tags. She never wore them except on her collar. And I sure as hell hadn't had them in my mouth when I ran from the creature in the cave. So I ask myself, was I possessed? Did some part of that monster want to follow me out? Because sometimes, when I stand in my bathroom mirror, I can see my reflection's lips curling into a grin that's too wide, too long, but only for a moment. Then it's me again. A battered survivor haunted by illusions of a day that supposedly never happened. I can't ever forget what it felt like out there. The sense that reality had loosened, that time itself was unraveling. The stench of that black fluid, the way it writhed in the open wounds. The quiet presence in the branches, the childlike laughter, the sight of my beloved dog's remains in that old cypress. It's all too real for me, even if no one else believes. A part of me wonders if, one day, I'll see Ethan again, or that thing that wore his shape. Maybe it lurks on some lonely road in the Blue Ridge Mountains, waiting for me to step off the path, to speak my name and give it more power. Or maybe it's already inside me, waiting for the right moment. I wish I could close this account with a neat explanation, or at least a final sense of peace. But I have none to offer. Even though I escaped those woods, they never really let me go. I never got Koda back, and I never found what was left of my friend. If he was truly my friend at all, or if the real Ethan died before any of this began, all I can say is, beware the back trails of Lake Jocassee. If you must go, don't speak your name to the trees or the water. Don't share your private grief with the wilderness, because there might be something there listening, hungry for your voice and your sorrow. Something that will show you wonders and horrors beyond imagining, warp time and place, and feed off your love until you have nothing left but terror and regret. I survive day by day, clinging to the faint hope that my story will serve as a warning. But deep down, I feel the forest still calling. And maybe, just maybe, it has my name.